Constellation is sponsored by Hims, a reliable option for those of you looking to rekindle the flame in your bedroom, and frankly, a whole lot more. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/con. That's HIMS.com/CON, and get your personalized ED treatment options and loads more. That's hims.com/con today. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products, which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. Constellation, Last Stand Media's conversational podcast, is brought to you by you. If you want to learn how to support our podcast network, head to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Constellation, Last Stand Media's conversational podcast. It's been a while since I've hosted it. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined by two people today now. I don't want everyone to get mad at me. We did have a four-person cast today. Dagan was supposed to host it, and I was just going to be on it. Dagan got pulled into a meeting at work with Nickelodeon and will not be able to get out of the meeting for a while. So I'm going to host it. I didn't have a topic today, but now I do. It's going to be the three of us. Please keep the crying to a minimum if possible. Let's welcome everyone. Rick Hogue, it's good to see your smiling face, my friend. How are you today? All the way from snowy Michigan?
It is snowy, at least snowy on the ground.
Yeah.
We have a lot of flurries in January, but I am totally okay with anybody crying about my appearances on Constellation. I am more than used to commenters taking it out on me. Whatever their day and week has brought to them, you can feel free to take it out on me. That's a service I provide at the Hogue Law Firm.
Well, it's wonderful to see you. We were just talking about the Lions. God, by the time this goes live, we will know the outcome. I think you guys will be okay in that game.
Oh, I'm looking forward to a deep Lions run. I love that team this year, but we'll see how it goes.
I'm rooting for Lions Chiefs. I know everyone hates the Chiefs. I actually kind of like Andy Reid. I kind of like Patrick Mahomes. And I think it's exciting that they could win 3 in a row, because it just doesn't happen. I think the Steelers were the last team, right, to win 3 in a row in the 70s. So should be pretty interesting. We'll see how it all goes this weekend. Everyone will know by the time they hear this. Good to see you, Hogue. Gene Park of the Washington Post. How are you today, my friend? I was thinking about you because I saw Jennifer Rubin, one of the favorite targets of my circles, leaving the Washington Post.
Former conservative Jennifer Rubin, right?
Yeah, turncoat. Making something peculiarly called the Contrarian. Oh, I bet.
Yeah.
How are you today, my friend? Good to see you.
Good. Jen Rubin, who is a columnist, for people who don't know Jen Rubin. Jen Rubin is a columnist at the Washington Post, and she was one of our conservative columnists. She's like proudly like we're like, look at her, look at us. We have a conservative on our, and we have other a lot more other conservative columnists too, right? And I think it'd be arguable that the entire opinion section is a lot more conservative than it ever has been before. Thanks most recently to the Bezos decision to tell them not to endorse Kamala. And there is a definite rightward shift in terms of like where they want to go or how they want to represent. But in the pre-2015 era, Rubin was one of our people where we're like, look, we have a conservative, right? And then when Trump hit, she decided to just spin it all around, or she became very like Lincoln Project-y or whatever like that.
Yeah, they're the worst.
Yeah, and then right, like just like, oh, this is a good opportunity for me to kind of like switch up and like, I don't know, like show, like I'm sure I've worked with her before, you know, like I've worked closely with her, and I'm actually part of the reason why she has like a good social media presence, because I helped her build that, you know.
I thought you were going to say you were part of the reason why she left. I feel bad about that.
No, it turns out to be that everything was too conservative for her, right? Or she left out of protest for Bezos and everything like that too. But after Trump won, or Trump started to get in power, she decided to kind of shift into a very blue MAGA type of role.
Yeah,
where she was
definitely
very stridently never Trump, and very liberal, very a loyalist liberal type of person. which annoyed a lot of people and pretty much annoyed everyone, I guess, except for the other blue MAGA types who really eat up, how great Biden is and how great Kamala is and everything like that. So.
Yeah, these people, I do wonder. I like the Lincoln Project. I'm glad you brought that up because my favorite piece of Schadenfreude from the election is the Rick Wilson video where he's in the airport and he's like, he's going to lose and he's going to lose big. And the walls are closed. And it's like, dude, these people don't know what the fuck they're talking about.
Rick Wilson. I'm glad you mentioned Rick Wilson. Very much this cut from the same cloth as Jen Rubin, I think, philosophically, right?
I'm not confused that they don't like Trump because I didn't like Trump either, but
yeah,
that they just became Democrats is a little strange, Yeah, I didn't just become a Democrat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you didn't just fall into the quote unquote other side or whatever like that, right? And it was interesting because just recently there's a Democratic strategist and fundraiser, this Asian woman. I'm going to guess she's Chinese, Lindy Lee, who I mean, for fuck's sake, if you just look at her, like that she's conservative. But the whole time she was kind of like being like the last 4 years, it was very profitable to become, like anti-Trump because Trump lost fairly well in 2020, right? Mm-hmm. And then you think, her calculation was like, oh, January 6th he's never coming back. And she became very blue MAGA in terms of going for DNC. But now earlier this week, she decided she's leaving the Democratic Party because of all of its woke ideologies and blah, blah, blah. And now she's declaring herself Republican. So that's one person on the other side. It's politics, man. That's what it is. It's just wolves and sharks smelling blood and going to where that blood is. That's what it is. I've tried to play in politics before in Hawaii, and I got screwed over for some of the dumbest reasons ever. And that's when I realized, I was playing campaign politics and I was helping people campaign. And then when I was promised things, and then when I was told that they were breaking these promises for purely political reasons, I was like, fuck this. I'm never doing this again. So I went
Mrs. Hogue Law was a congressional staffer for a while. And the stories she tells would keep me out of politics my entire life, honestly.
Who again? I'm sorry?
My wife. Mrs. Hogue Law.
Yeah. Oh, Mrs. Hogue Law. Okay.
Who did she work for?
I honestly don't remember. I'm going to get in trouble for that, but she's unlikely to watch this, I don't think.
So that's okay. She won't know. She'll have no idea. It's funny. Like I was watching some of the, it's just some of the people we elect to these offices are the fucking stupidest people I've ever seen in my life. Like it's incredible. And no offense, but I was watching the hearings in the Senate for the various cabinet positions. And that Senator Hirono from Hawaii sounds like a fucking Muppet. Like she can't speak. She's looking down, reading questions. The fuck is wrong with this woman? Like, how did she get into the Senate? That's the best Hawaii has to offer. I highly doubt it.
I really do hate confirmation hearings because it really is that grandstanding where they're not looking to actually have a question answered.
I have so much to say about Mazie Hirono.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you that I just mentioned that I worked in campaigns in Hawaii, right? I was working so hard to make sure Mazie Hirono would not get elected. I campaigned for Linda Lingle, the former Republican governor. I wanted her in Congress. I thought she was so much smarter. I thought she understood federal laws so much better. I thought she would just represent the state better. This is how you know that I'm very apolitical. I don't care about parties either way. I looked at Hirono and I thought this woman does not actually know anything, period. So it's very cool that you saw that. Like you heard that. You hear that.
I mean, I never heard her speak. I knew who she was, but I never really heard anything out of her until these hearings. I guess as recently. And I'm like, dude, she kind of sounds like a fucking idiot. Like,
she does not know what she's talking about. So that's why I was like, okay, well, Linda Lingle, she is conservative, and she was towing the line during the McCain days, where it was clear that McCain and Palin were going to lose. Mm-hmm. But she was one of the few governors who actually went to the RNC and spoke up at one of the speeches. She put her foot out there, and that kind of sunk her because you can't, being in Hawaii, you can't go against Obama, right? The native son of our native prince,
right, of course.
So that really sank her, and then she ran against Hirono and lost, and that was my bet. I was trying to help her among the young millennials because I was a millennial. So I was, and I was like one of the biggest networkers in Hawaii. So I was arranging like fundraising events for her among young businessmen and young millennials to kind of ingratiate her into young people's minds, but it did not work. And Hirono won.
Yeah, she sure did.
To my deep disappointment, and that was part of the reason why that I didn't get jobs in Hawaii, because I was associated with her too. You know.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, it's a small place probably. Well, everyone knows each other. You know.
Exactly. Everyone knew that I was like you. There's photos of me like at her events and everything like that too. You know, like I'm just like, hey, Linda Lingo. You know, but yeah, she ended up becoming nobody. It sucks.
I used to think about this with Tulsi actually when she was in the house, where I'm like, you got to fly between Hawaii and Washington D.C. over and over and over and over again. I would put a fucking gun barrel in my mouth if I had to be. I would never. How many people in Alaska, Hawaii, and maybe even states in the West Coast are like, I don't know if I want to do this just because of the travel. You know.
I haven't been to Hawaii in 8 years because I don't want to fly 18 hours.
Yeah, it's so far away.
It's so far away, man.
It's deceiving. I mean, you know, because you lived there for many years, but it's like deceivingly far away. I don't think people realize sometimes how, because we have these different maps and it's always like in a corner, and it's like, no, dude, it is literally like as big as the United States into the ocean.
Yeah,
Pacific Ocean is pretty big.
Yeah, Honolulu is the most isolated major metropolis in the world on the planet Earth. There is no other place, you know.
It's good shit. I love it.
Just in the middle of the ocean. So yeah, my buddy Brian Schatz, who's the Democratic senator.
Yeah.
We're friends because I actually met him when he was actually just a fundraiser. We did not become friends before he became lieutenant governor of Hawaii, and now the senior senator in Hawaii. But we used to do a lot of karaoke together.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I've never been to Hawaii. I've always wanted to go, but it is far. I thought maybe the next time I go to Japan, just stop over, or on the way back. Kind of be nice on the way back, like a little bit of a refuge in the United States, cut the flight in half, and then you can like kind of be in a place where that's familiar. It's Hawaii, but it's the United States.
It's America, yeah.
Right.
I don't know. Yakuza has told me Hawaii is just Japan.
Everyone there just speaks Japanese for some reason. Yeah, for sure.
My aunt Joni lived in Japan, not in Japan, in Hawaii for a few years, and it was so in the late 80s, early 90s, and it was so mystical because I was a little kid, and it's like it was a big deal that she left, and she got lonely and kind of sad and came back after a couple of years, but she still has like the rainbow plate and all that kind of stuff.
The rainbow driver's license plate.
Yeah.
Or
like
the driver's plate. Car
yeah,
plate.
and she, I remember like she shipped her car there and did all this kind of stuff, and it's like, geez, man.
Yeah, I shipped my car there from Guam to Hawaii, and I was broke as shit. So fortunately, I actually knew a pilot of a freighting or shipping a service, and he was like, dude, I can get your car onto my plane for free, no problem.
Nice.
He was like, but you have to wait until there is a large shipment of fish that I can load your car up with fish, and that would make it okay.
Oh, interesting.
It sounds like a smuggler.
Yeah.
He was basically smuggling my car out of Guam. Like, it was not like legal, but like, like we did it, and it was filled with fish. And then when I got my little 2003 Toyota Corolla back, it was stanky.
Yeah, I bet it was. Ugh.
Real stinky, but I got my car for free.
Yeah, well traveled car.
Yeah, for sure.
But
yeah, I'm so glad you said that about Hirono. Like, I felt crazy. I felt crazy in Hawaii. I was like, is anybody listening to what she's actually saying?
Yeah,
she is completely misunderstanding the issues. She was talking about immigration. And specifically, the issue is Micronesian immigration, and the fact that we bombed the islands, and that there's a treaty with these islands, that there is a free use of travel and citizenship among the islands because of what we did with them, right? And then she was confusing that with Mexican immigration and border immigration, and I'm like, all you're doing is taking national talking points and repeating them on something that completely is different. There's no borders in Hawaii, What the hell are you talking about?
Yeah, she's a weirdo. And it's not a partisan thing. I promise you, it's not a partisan thing. Like there are Democrats that I listen to that I don't agree with them, but they're fully cogent. Actually, most of them are cogent and real people. was listening to Bernie Sanders recently. Actually, he was on Lex Friedman maybe or something like that. And I was like, this is a great example of why there shouldn't be age limits, because he's totally fine.
Yeah.
He's totally fine. He hasn't lost a step at all. And he makes, actually, I'll be honest with you, Bernie Sanders makes more and more sense to me the older I get. But I think he's softened a little bit though, too. Very similar to John Fetterman. Like John Fetterman is like not even a Democrat anymore for some reason. But he ran as a progressive. Yeah. And now he's like, I don't want to be a progressive. Yeah. So that's
the power of your populace. His electorate is of a specific way. You can only go so far afield from the people that voted you in. And yes, I don't have that federal experience that Gene does. I am, as a lawyer, someone that has interacted with my state legislature quite a bit. And I can tell you from personal experience that there is not an intelligence filter on becoming a lawmaker.
No.
That the people that write the laws, the people that, yes, enforce the laws at the governor's level or at the president's level, but certainly the people that write the laws do not have to have any specific acumen for doing so. And unwinding some of the problems that they make is part of my job, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I do wonder how high you can get, how high in a position you can get, and be a retard, basically, right? And I now know that it's like because I know people are like, George W. Bush was a dummy and Trump's a dummy, and I'm like, no, they're not. This is not what I'm talking about. I do wonder if you could become, like, I can't think of a truly stupid president, even in history, like a truly stupid man. There were presidents that were lazy and didn't care, and like Warren Harding apparently didn't work and just kind of hung out, but they weren't dumb people. I do wonder when intelligence outranks ambition, because like getting the House, certainly in the state legislature, it's just ambition and pressing,
and a bit of money.
And money, you got to press.
And being surrounded by good people too, like good, smart, like having a good, smart team, right?
Right. You can't. Not everyone can be dumb in the operation. The figurehead can be the dumb one. But I just wonder about that. And yeah, I don't mean to pick on just her, because there are others. Like I can't remember the guy's name, but it's the ex-football coach. That's the senator of Mississippi or Alabama or one of those. He doesn't belong there either. He sounds like a dummy too. So it's not a partisan thing or a gendered thing or whatever. It's just like some of these people. What brought it to mind, Gene, basically was I was reading about how she reads her questions so slowly that she's basically out of time by the end. Like, no, it's like, all right, you're out of time. Next. And it's like, dude, she's completely useless.
Like her winning was a huge part of the reason why I lost complete faith in the Hawaii electorate. Where I was just like, yeah, these people have no idea what they want or what's going on. So
yeah, she's a. Well, poor, was it Mazzy or Maisie? Hirono?
Maisie.
Poor Maisie.
Hirono.
I'm not trying to beat on you too badly, my lady. All right.
She knows very well that I don't like her. So if she's for some reason listening to Constellation, surprise.
She's like, I just wanted to hear about PlayStation.
I just wanted to hear Colin's thoughts about Ben's studio, possibly closing down. I didn't know I was going to get all this heat. My goodness.
Constellation is sponsored by Hims, a reliable option for those of you looking to rekindle the flame in your bedroom, and frankly, a whole lot more. Head to hims.com/con, that's CON, to learn more about potential treatment options. When you hear the term ED, you may be thinking, who's Ed? I feel like I know a person named Ed. And let's be honest, we all do. But actually, ED stands for erectile dysfunction, the kind of thing you'd see commercials for when you're watching football with your family, making things as awkward as possible. But don't curl into a ball. ED affects tons of men around the world, and if you can't perform in the bedroom well, that no doubt has a downstream effect throughout the rest of your life. With Hims, though, men suffering from erectile dysfunction can receive a personalized treatment plan that helps them get back in fighting shape, and there's not a one-size-fits-all option either. You can go down the well-worn Cialis or Viagra routes, or even grab their generic versions, get Hims chewable hard mints and other options too, and you can speak to a Hims professional to figure out what's what. It's worth noting that Hims is also a one-stop shop for lots of other men-centric health issues too. Hair loss, weight gain, skin problems, and more. Surely each of us is suffering from at least one of these, no? I know my skin is drier than the Sahara Desert this time of year, but I digress. My friends, life is stressful, there's a lot going on, and it's important that you look out for your health and try to engage in those parts of life that bring you joy, like being rock hard in the bedroom. You won't need insurance for Hims either, since everything is so affordable anyway. And with hundreds of thousands of subscribers, Hims knows exactly how to help you with ED and lots of other issues too. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/con. That's HIMS.com/CON. And get your personalized ED treatment options and loads more. That's hims.com/con today. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. All right, let's get into the topics at hand. Gene, I want to begin with you this week, if you don't mind. What do you want to talk about this week?
Yes, sir. I think this might be a newsier Constellation, but I think these are fun. And I sometimes hear feedback that sometimes some of these topics can be a little like therapy sessions,
Sure.
Which obviously people enjoy. But I think people like to talk about what's going on and everything.
Yeah, right? But people say that summon sign when Micah and I are on together. It's like our marriage counseling, and Brad's our marriage counselor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, people don't know what they want. Come on, I mean, they voted Mazie Hirono in for Congress, so whatever. Well, today breaking news, and I'm going to read from the Washington Post. But I want to talk about TikTok today. I think this is an interesting cohort, especially you two, actually, in particular. Hogue, with his obviously background in financial and business law, and Colin being a businessman who has to engage in social media but has largely avoided TikTok for the most part.
Yeah, I've never been on it.
Yeah. And then for me, who browses TikTok sometimes, but I'm not addicted to the feed. I'm not like scrolling all day, and like it hasn't become my entertainment replacement for like TV shows or anything like that, like it has for some people, or their life, or their lifeline for information. They're like, oh, I read on TikTok that this is going on or whatever like that. And for some reason, people really rely on TikTok as like their main source of entertainment or information or something, whatever. But today, Friday, January 17th, the Supreme Court upheld a federal law that effectively bans TikTok in the U.S. on Sunday. So yesterday, by the time this comes out, unless the wildly popular video sharing app pulls off an unlikely last-minute divestiture from Chinese ownership. It was a unanimous Supreme Court decision, a major blow for TikTok, injecting deep uncertainty into the app's future with the deadline to sell the platform just 2 days away. President-elect Donald Trump, who has vowed to use his power to quote-unquote save the app, will be sworn into office a day later. This is really funny. This is like January 6th for TikTokers, right?
I know it is.
You've seen that on social media.
That rules.
No U.S. law has ever shut down a popular social media platform before, let alone one with more than 170 million users in the United States who rely on the app for news, entertainment, and self-expression, just like I was talking about. Trump had asked the Supreme Court to delay the implementation of the law to give him the opportunity to act once he returns to the White House. The court declined the option, and no sale of the app seemingly imminent. The ban is now poised to take effect the day before Trump's inauguration. And this was the law. For background, the law was passed in April with bipartisan support and signed and supported by President Joe Biden in response to national security concerns about the Chinese government's potential influence over the platform. So yeah, I wanted to talk about that. I am someone in particular who thinks it's a little ridiculous that TikTok users are calling themselves refugees and then fleeing to the Chinese app, what's been called Red Note,
Little Red Book or whatever.
Little Red Book or whatever.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. I mean, look. I think anti-Chinese like propaganda or whatever is just a little too much, and but calling it Red Note is just way too on the nose, guys.
It's crazy, dude.
Like, what are you guys doing? But everyone fleeing to Red Note and kind of gawking at like Chinese culture and be like, oh my God, like look at how cool and progressive the Chinese people are. And then a day later, there's a bunch of people on Chinese apps saying, you Americans need to stop coming onto our app and stop saying shit like gay, trans, blah, blah, blah. What the fuck are you people doing? Like, what is this, right? Like, this isn't TikTok, you know. Very, very strange behaviors for everybody. Broken brains everywhere, from my opinion. But Hogue also tweeted something that I thought was really interesting too. And, you know, like I thought that I bring this up because Hogue is here and he can actually talk about some things. But let me look up your tweet right now real quick.
Sure.
But I really liked what you said here, and I think it's worth discussion. But you quote tweeted the Washington Post. And you say, are you picking up on a certain amount of glee from legacy reporting on the U.S. government's effective seizure of a media platform? There was a time when journalists would not be so
Obsequious.
obsequious.
The lawyer in me.
Christ.
Illiterate moment from Gene Park here. Obsequious towards novel and damaging uses of state power. So yeah, I thought, you know, let's start with you, Hogue. I thought you know, expand your thoughts on that, or just your reaction overall to today's news.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think this is a big one. And it's really odd for the Supreme Court to issue a per curiam opinion, which is unsigned. It doesn't say who wrote it. It just says it's the opinion of the court. They can really only do this when it's unanimous. There were two concurrences, one of which questioned the scrutiny applied to the First Amendment question, one of which questioned the whole process of going this fast through kind of the thinking.
Gorsuch and Sotomayor, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I am understanding of that. I tend to agree with the Supreme Court that this law does not present a First Amendment issue, at least not an obvious one. Yeah. I understand the intuitive kind of position that, hey, if the United States is going to ban a platform used by 100+ million people, that's a First Amendment issue. But from a legal process perspective, we look at it a little bit more closely and say, well, changing the ownership of a corporation is not what we would consider a content restriction, right? It's content neutral. It doesn't appear that way. We've seen how content can change when ownership changes at a place like Twitter. But on its face, we have to have some kind of structure for interpreting the laws. It does appear to be content neutral as I look at it on that side of things. Where I object to this law, and I do object to it, I'm not a TikTok user either, but where I object to this law is that the way it is written, it says essentially adversary-controlled social media platforms have to divest, and then it gives a definition for that kind of thing, and then says, outside of that definition, this will definitely apply to TikTok and ByteDance. And our Constitution in the United States has a specific rule that says essentially Congress shall not punish people by name that are otherwise outside the operation of a general law enforced against the populace, right? It's called a Bill of Attainder. Our Constitution says that's not allowed. We can't do that. We can't just go and start naming and shaming and punishing people that aren't otherwise subject to punishment because we don't want our legal system to do that. And so I look at this and say, this is an obvious Bill of Attainder. The DC Circuit, because this all happens, this whole legal process happens before the Supreme Court looks at it, kicks that argument out, so the Supreme Court never addresses it, on the basis that this law does not represent a punishment. Says, yes, it's a Bill of Attainder. Yes, TikTok and ByteDance are named separate from the defined term. That might be a problem for specificity on the Bill of Attainder rules, but it only matters if you actually punish someone. And this is a divestiture. This is not a seizure. This is not a taking. This is not a historical punishment. And so we're not going to allow this Bill of Attainder argument to move through. I think that's wrong. I've looked at that opinion a couple of times. I think that that's motivated reasoning justified by the congressional kind of hand waving that this is a national security concern. And I get upset at these kinds of things, if you can't tell from my volume level already, because I do think that our legal system is subject, as in any system, to having human beings kind of motivate their reasoning for whatever they want to have happen at the end. And our Supreme Court right now is especially susceptible to that, I would argue, because it's a weak leadership from the Chief Justice. But reasonable minds can differ on that point. In this particular case, the DC Circuit says it's not a punishment because it's really just a regulation of this entity, even though they're named and shamed in this law. The Supreme Court doesn't look at it since it's not a First Amendment concern. I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think it could have used a more in-depth, full analysis, especially when it's going to impact so many people. And I do think from the other direction, a human being, an American citizen that says, hey, I've made my life on this. I chose to move in this direction because I liked what this platform was doing for whatever reason, is going to be negatively impacted. Is going to have what is going to feel like their First Amendment freedom of speech, freedom of expression impacted by Congress just saying, no, you can't do this anymore. And I do feel for that. I think this is all kind of a bad direction to go in for jurisprudence and for legalization, lawmaking in the United States, because I think more than likely what's going to happen here is you're going to have essentially a kind of radicalized is a word that's overused, but a group of people that invested their time and money and savings and resources into making content on TikTok be very negative towards what the US government has taken from them in this particular instance. And yes, some of them are going to be more amenable to propaganda or messaging from adversaries of the United States. I think this is a poorly thought out kind of solution to the quote unquote TikTok problem. And at the end of the day, I don't think the Supreme Court actually had enough to say that this was okay, other than the hand waving from Congress saying it's a national security concern. So as an American citizen, as a lawyer, I look at this and say, there's a slippery slope here. There's a bad direction these kinds of laws can go. And I have another tweet, Gene, that I put out earlier based on this particular decision that says, I do worry that national security is essentially the loophole that the US governments, states and federal, have used now for a couple of decades to just go through whatever restrictions are on their power, authority, and lawmaking that exist in the Constitution. And I think that's a bad direction to go in. And that's not said as someone who loves TikTok. I don't use TikTok. I've never been attracted to that platform.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you have all that perspective. I'm also glad that you mentioned some empathy for creators. I have no empathy for users. Fucking go somewhere else, for fuck's sake, right? Don't call yourself a refugee. But I do have a lot of empathy for people who have made a livelihood on that platform. You know, like imagine if for us here at Patreon, imagine if the government shut down Patreon for some reason because they felt that Patreon was, you know, had you know, ulterior motives or was, you know, a lot of leftists believe that Biden tried to shut down TikTok because they were losing control of the narrative that what they're doing in Gaza and the support of Israel is good, as opposed to everyone in TikTok saying, you know, free Palestine and everything. But yeah, imagine if Patreon shut down. How would we feel? You know,
Yeah.
that would ruin Colin. You know,
Yeah,
so,
it would
Colin,
be.
Colin, what do you think?
Yeah, I've thought about Patreon in the sense that I've always wondered, what if they had even a Chinese buyer at some point? And what I think about that is they're a healthy company, as far as I understand, but I don't think they would sell to a Chinese entity because it would have this. This is a freedom of expression platform or whatever. There's crazy shit going on Patreon. Like a lot of it is pornographic or, you know, inappropriate games and novels and all these kinds of things. And I don't know, very political and all these different things. So I just think that they would find a better buyer. I think that the thing with TikTok, like I have a few notes here of things I was thinking about. So I am also glad that you guys expressed sorrow and empathy with the creators, and I feel it for the users too. I mean, it kind of sucks. It's a bummer. It would be losing access to anything that I enjoy. Like if they got rid of Twitter or X or whatever today, I would live. But it's like where I get all my news. It's just my feed of information on sports and on politics and on games and on whatever.
And I'd have to grab all my bookmarks. That's half my virtual legalities being planned.
Right, exactly. You'd have to make like contingencies and get on the helicopter on the top of the embassy and get the hell out of there.
That is annoying, yeah. Sure.
And so I am actually I have, you know, empathy for everybody involved because I think it kind of sucks. But you also make your bed. It's been known since the beginning that this app was peculiar. And if you read, and I think this is an important thing to talk about, as I understand it, and Hogue, you can check me on this, but it's fairly well known that the Chinese government does use TikTok to get people's information, that they have gone to ByteDance and gotten things from people, and that because they hold golden shares in the company, as they would with any company of this nature, that they have complete control over what ultimately they would end up doing. There have been multiple reports that I know, that I'm looking at some of them now, where it's like, yeah, actually they were asked to like do this thing and spy on this journalist or do this, and they did it. So,
yeah, I mean, I think that there's some competing narratives on this particular question. It is known that ByteDance has essentially obligations to the Chinese state infrastructure to deliver data and information when asked. It's a little bit less clear exactly how that mechanism works, how often it's happened. And one of the things that happened in this Supreme Court case was that the US government tried to put forth confidential, secret evidence about what was happening with TikTok and ByteDance. And that presents a problem from our legal system because you are on the other side of a legal issue, a lawsuit like this one, entitled to whatever evidence the other side is presenting. Right. And the US government said, no, Supreme Court, you should consider this, but we're not sharing it with TikTok and ByteDance. And the other folks in this particular lawsuit were a couple of creators groups that were fighting for their freedom of expression. And you're not allowed to share those things. The Supreme Court, wisely, I think, although I don't know how true this is, it requires a certain amount of trust in our system, says in their decision today that we are not taking into account any of the secret information the US government gave us. It's only based on the public record. And so essentially, don't try to do that again. But the US government did try to say, we have other confidential information that says it's really bad to backstop Congress's position. And the Supreme Court said, we don't need that because we think national security is compelling in and of itself, and we don't need to go into what you have, quote unquote, found. But that requires a high level of trust in both kind of the national information infrastructure, the Supreme Court, and Congress's kind of evidentiary background. And I don't think we're living in a high trust society right now on those basics, right? Institutions and whatnot. So it's going to be a situation where people that believe that TikTok was okay and or didn't care that their data was being used by the Chinese are going to be upset at the US government. Is that okay? I'm not the right person to say one way or the other, but it's a problem that the US government's going to have to deal with.
All right. So there are a couple other things that I wanted to also bring into here that we haven't talked about that from the perspective of me thinking about it. First of all, I just think about when I first heard of TikTok, and it was at Dagan's house. It's why it's too bad Dagan's not here today. He was talking about how his daughter, who was about to go to college, so this was in 2018, I think. And so this was 7 years ago. She must have been in middle school or whatever. And he was like, yeah, it's like a karaoke app or some weird thing like that. And I was like, oh, interesting. And then it was in my brain, but then I didn't think about it. And then it just kind of turned into this huge phenomenon. But I never even downloaded it to my phone and signed in or anything like that. People would send me links occasionally, and sometimes they would open in a browser and sometimes they wouldn't. I guess maybe it's by video. So I have watched TikToks, but I've not ever been on the app. So I can't speak to it from that perspective. But two important things, I think, there's multiple important things. The first is, I think this gets wrapped up into like China.
Yes.
And all this. And I think we have to differentiate, although I think it goes without saying, it's not the Chinese people that per se, right? China is an ancient, established, dominant force in global history, and especially in their region. And
sure, I play Dynasty Warriors.
Right, of course. Dynasty Warriors celebrates the three kingdoms and all of the rest. And I think that it's too bad that they're in the situation that they're in because governmentally, because there is a power still to be unlocked, I think, with China and the Chinese if they were just kind of removed from this soft communism that they're part of. But it has a lot to do with obviously their government. And it's what gets me frustrated when we focus so much on Russia, which to me is like a fucking irrelevance, where we have this real force in the Pacific that can actually move on allies and do things that we are nervous about. And I just think we don't treat them. There's not a reciprocity in our relationship with each other. And I think that this is an example of that. So if I were in a position of power before this law even passed, what I would have been like is like, okay, TikTok can stay, but Facebook, Twitter, everything has to run in China. You're not allowed to embargo our companies and then allow and then have expectations that your shit. So if it's going to be let's have free trade if that's what you really want to have. And we're expected always to play by different sets of rules. Oh, illegal immigrants can just pour into the United States, go to their home countries and try to get in. People can just take advantage of an oligarchic situation and fund elections and do all these kinds of things and the haves and the have-nots and all this crazy shit, but go to other places and try that and it doesn't work as well. And I think we need to just have a more equivalent stance with other countries where it's like, yes, we are going to play fairly or we're going to have a protectionist situation with you. And I would have done it from that perspective. So it wouldn't even been the golden shares and all of that. It's just like, why can't our social media networks work in China?
Yeah.
To me, we need to play
and harvest their data, which is what they do anyways, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, you can harvest our data. We're going to learn a lot about your people though, too.
Exactly. Yeah.
And we'll see how much you like that. I think that this is where I'm a deep protectionist. I have been my entire political life. I've always been confused about the fight against it. And I think we're seeing the results of us just playing loosely with monetary policy, with labor policy, and all of these things that have hurt us and especially hurt the working class in the United States. But it really should be in all things that we just have an equivalent relationship economically. And if we don't, then we should just cut it off from that angle. And it's what bothers me about people saying like, we can't have tariffs. Everything's going to be more money. And it's like, but you're buying things created by slave labor, sold by a country that devalues its own currency and sells things artificially cheaply to destroy your labor base and all these kinds of things. And you can look at TikTok as a sort of digital version of something quite dangerous, in that they do have access to your data. They know a lot. They know a lot about the United States just through this app. And I've read weird things about, it's unclear if the app listens to you. It's unclear if the app, saves everything about you. It's certainly scraping your IP and all of this kind of data. I'm bothered by this.
One area that the Supreme Court found pretty useful to making the determination they made today to allow the ban of TikTok was this notion that the users of TikTok could allow the app to access all aspects of their phone, the contact list and whatnot. And so people that were being impacted were not just those that had otherwise acceded to interact with TikTok or China. So that was part of the basis here that the Supreme Court found compelling, was that there was nothing that less than a ban that the United States could do to get people that didn't want to be with TikTok, but were otherwise in people's phone contact lists and whatnot, to not have their data scraped by China as well. I'm at least somewhat sympathetic to that opinion, because otherwise I say, all right, if you want to engage with TikTok and you're okay with them scraping your data in China, I'm more kind of liberty oriented on that front. I think it's dumb. I wouldn't do that myself. Heck, I sometimes have a ping when I'm agreeing to the data licensure on a Hoyoverse game, right? If I'm playing Honkai Star Rail, I think twice about whether or not I'm going to give that acceptance to that contract. But if somebody wants to do that, I don't think it's necessarily the place for the government to step in and say no. But if it is grabbing things from other people, I think maybe yes. The other thing I wanted to say, Colin, was I am in at least some agreement with you on the notion of equal treatment or reciprocity, insofar as, going back to my original stance on this, I do think the US government has created an issue for TikTok users and the generation that uses social media platforms in general. One of those issues is that by singling out TikTok, singling out ByteDance, it looks a lot to me from the outside like, well, the Chinese aren't allowed to steal your data, but Twitter, the Patriot Act, whoever else, it certainly is. It's okay for us to do it. We're the good guys.
Yeah.
But I think that's not going to fly with this generation and with people that really look at the question terribly closely. So I do have a kind of instinctual revulsion at, it's not okay for them to scrape data. It's not okay for them because they're the bad guys, but we're the good guys. So it's fine.
Yeah,
I don't love that from our government.
I completely agree with you here. And this is where I have that's why I was saying, like, I think you can pursue this totally from an economic perspective, being like, go fuck yourselves. You're not allowed to do business here in ways that we're not allowed to do business in China, period. And it goes for telecoms. Like, people are so aghast by this, but Chinese telecoms can't operate in the United States. And as far as I understand, the United States is not remotely the only country in the world that has either banned TikTok or banned TikTok doing business there. So I know, for instance, in Canada, there is no TikTok. TikTok is an app that's legal, but there is no corporate presence of TikTok. They're not allowed to be there. So, but the other thing that I wanted to say was about the the First Amendment right to expression and all this. And this is the thing that I am more concerned about, because I fucking hate the American government and don't trust anything they say. So I'm dubious of their motives. And it's funny that this came up because I was thinking about this recently. During what was it? It was one of the like a terrorist attack or something recently, where Tesla used its cameras on a car and like its tracking system to track a criminal, and like basically nailed this person by using, I guess, all the different technologies available to them and leverage them to help the authorities.
Was
And
that Luigi?
No, maybe that's what it was. Yeah, that's what it was. And this struck me as so strange that no one was saying like, wait a minute, what? I don't.
Yep.
Because it reminds me of, I mean, it's the famous case, of course, but Apple refusing to unlock the San Bernardino bomber's iPhone, being like, we're not doing it. And they got, I think, brought to court and all of that. And they're like, we're not doing it, because if we do that, then you can kind of break us open in all sorts of different ways and have reasonable expectations that we would follow that. And I feel like I was really concerned about what Tesla did, actually, even though it helped bring a criminal to justice, a bad person to justice. I don't know that it was actually worth doing that, because now what? I mean, so now you drive a Tesla and that you're just like, yeah, if you do something that we don't like or the government doesn't like, we're going to fucking turn all your data over. And we have a lot of it, Starlink and all this different stuff. And so from that perspective, I'm not crazy about it, because I don't want the government dictating where people can say what they say and all of that kind of stuff. But I think it would be ostensibly a more compelling geopolitical or economic argument if they were really mono-focused on China as a threat, which they really should be from a geopolitical position, although I think we can live in some tranquility with each other. But when everyone is an enemy and you're a hammer and everything is a nail, then it just seems like another way for them to dig at a national entity or remove the freedom of expression for their people or whatever, because it's like, oh, Russia, oh, Palestine and Hamas, oh, this, oh, that, and the Saudis and and China. And it's like, Jesus Christ, shut the fuck up. We should have always been focused on this one thing the entire time, and it would have made more sense with more clarity if we were. People probably wouldn't even been as into TikTok if that was the case. Instead, you muddy the field, you cry wolf a bunch of times, and then people just assume you have and impugn your motives and assume that you have poor motives. Now, the one thing that I'll say is there are eager buyers for TikTok. I've said many times, Bobby Kotick is one of those people that wants to buy TikTok. He's made that very clear. And ByteDance is apparently only the United States is only 15% of the TikTok audience, which is pretty interesting. So they don't have a compelling reason to do that. And it would be an example of a government kind of extracting an entity for its own culture.
Yeah,
basically.
I want to talk about that.
Yeah, I'm not
just a little bit.
Yeah, I want you to, because it that also seems to bother me, where it's like, we're going to hold a gun to your head and kind of extract this very valuable technology from you. And
yeah, what I want to talk about is that, like, social media, the people that are anti-TikTok. I don't blame anybody for being anti-TikTok or anti-China. That is up to you. But there are people out there saying, well, the fact that ByteDance won't sell is evidence enough that they are only in this for the Americans' data, and a reasonable private corporation would sell on these grounds. And I understand that. It's worth a lot of money. But you said it exactly right, Colin. There is an argument for ByteDance or anyone else put in this position to say we don't negotiate with terrorists, to say, no, we're not going to sell this company. We're not going to disband what we have built, because that's going to encourage not just the United States, but the next jurisdiction to go and demand something of us that maybe we won't be amenable to at that point in time. So yes, Mr. Beast might offer us that money. Bobby Kotick might offer us that money. We're not interested, because we're not interested in selling on these grounds in this circumstance, because this isn't fair to us. And you can think that's ridiculous. You can think that's a complete put on by the people that might say that at TikTok US or ByteDance. But I do think there is a reasoned position that says we are not going to sell our assets in this circumstance.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I see that around a lot. They're like, oh, clearly they're in it for the data. And like, as Colin said, there are only 170 million users in the US. They have over 1 billion users total. So that is a 15% slice.
Right. Are they going to fragment the business, sell the entire thing? Like, I don't like the government putting a gun to a company's head, generally speaking, and saying, unless it's for maybe monopolistic reasons, which this isn't.
Which this clearly not isn't.
No.
Yeah, at all. So yeah.
Or like, especially like vertical monopolies and whatnot. Like if you want to disrupt that stuff, that's cool. But this is not that. This is something deeper. And like I said, it's truly geopolitical, which is why it should have always been really dealt like that, with a mono focus on the only true threat the United States faces in the entire world, which is China. And instead, it's like, no, got to send bombs to Ukraine, and we got to worry about what's going on with Israel, and there's crazy shit in the Middle East, and we got troops in Africa, and this. And so everyone's like, I don't know, man. Like, I don't even know what the fuck you're talking about anymore.
Right.
And it's a bummer. because I just think I really think that's a major part of it, is that there's just a lack of clarity because we've lost focus on the adversarial nature of this entity. And it's why I wanted to bring up earlier the difference between China and the Chinese people and the CCP, and the situation they're in, and really the level of soft communism that they're in at this point. I think it's just totalitarianism. I'm not even really sure it's communism at this point. But it's not, like I said, it's not unprecedented for us to say you can't do business here. And Huawei was the big example of that back in the day, and which is like a massive Chinese telecom. And so I don't know. I'm bummed about it for the creators more than anything, but I also feel like this will get solved. I don't know.
I was gonna say, if I can add to this story, I don't think it's going to be sold or banned. I don't think the Biden administration is going to leap on the day that they are otherwise prohibited from operating here and mandate some kind of divestiture, and their administration will end the next day. I don't think that Trump's going to leap on enforcing this law either. So part of the story with any law is that it's just words on a page. It is just black and white. It doesn't mean anything until enforcement does something about it. And enforcement at the federal level in the United States is the presidency. It's the executive branch. And I don't think Biden's going to move on it this weekend. I don't think Trump's going to move on it when he's president, at least not immediately. And so I think there is still some time, even after these deadlines, you'll see reported after the Supreme Court decision. There is
a massive ramification, though, economically, even if that happens, right? Because then they get into gray areas about if we're even allowed.
Yeah, you get into banks and credit systems.
Right,
and
exactly. Like I was going to bring up the marijuana industry, where like the marijuana industry, though it is legal in most states, doesn't like. I don't know if you guys have been to dispensaries and done this kind of thing, where it's like they don't take credit cards typically. There's a huge story I remember I don't know if it was in the Washington Post or one of these things years ago, where it was about a guy that owned a dispensary in Washington and his day of going and paying his taxes, and then he had to do it in cash, and he had to hire like an armored truck and all this crazy shit.
It's a problem.
Right. And so I'm wondering if you're an ad buyer and seller, if you're selling things on TikTok, if you have some sort of store, not a storefront, but something you're pitching your jewelry, or there is a lot of confusion about if that's going to be legal or not. And then you wonder if ByteDance will just keep TikTok alive, even though it's going to lose a lot of money in the United States in that situation, just to kind of stick it to everyone. So I think that, unfortunately, though, you're probably right that it's very similar to what's going on with illegal immigration. Like all this shit is already illegal. No one does anything about it. But this, I think it's going to be more difficult. They have to make it clear, in other words, that these different entities can still deal with TikTok. And if TikTok loses its ability to churn ads, I don't think it's going to go very well for them.
It'll be an interesting time, but there are windows of opportunity. There is a 90-day extension period contemplated in the statute if a president wants to put forth that extension. So the most obvious situation is the Biden administration doesn't jump on executing the law on the last day of his administration. Trump doesn't jump on doing something against TikTok on the first day of his administration, comes up with a reason to extend the window another 90 days and figures it out later. That's the most likely thing I see happening in the next couple of days.
I agree with that, and my prediction is that there's so much. It's become kind of a circus now to try to buy TikTok. Mr. Beast is posting videos where he's like, "Yeah, I just got out of a meeting with a bunch of billionaires, and I'm with my lawyer," and he shows some fucking 20-year-old kid, like holding up a laptop. He's like, "Yeah, I'm with my lawyer right now, so we're
you can look young."
Hit us up TikTok or whatever like that. So it's becoming a kind of a clown show, and I have to think that Trump would find that irresistible to engage in, to be surrounded by people like Elon or Mr. Beast or a room full of 20-year-old billionaires, I guess, to try to do that. Would anything come out of it? Probably not. But it'll be another McDonald's press tour. I forgot that he did that. Like, that's why he won, right? That's why he won.
I couldn't speak to why he won.
Kamala was out here hanging out with Joy Behar and Whoopi Goldberg, and Trump is with the McDonald's manager that's earning $70,000. At a very base level. What does that look like?
But I do think the China angle, Colin,
I'm rambling,
is a problem. Insofar as
what did you say? I'm sorry.
Rule of law. I was just speaking to Colin's commentary on laser focusing on China. And again, from the lawyer's perspective right here, I certainly understand your geopolitical standpoint and kind of diplomacy and international law concepts. But for the United States government and the United States legal system, I do think China has represented an issue because they have passed so many laws and so many statutes that are designed to name and shame, designed to make people feel bad about engaging with Chinese infrastructure, whatever it might be. And this pops into my head because of the recent Tencent designation that you probably saw floating around the news. With respect to the U.S.'s National Defense Authorization Act has essentially the U.S. government putting out lists of things that are Chinese military companies. And one of the most recent versions of this a couple of years ago said you can also include things that you deem to be what they call military civilian fusion contributors. And in that context, basically companies that are not military by nature, but might otherwise be aiding the technology or other capabilities of the Chinese military. And that appears to be the reason why the US government put Tencent Holdings on this list. I know we've talked, Colin, in the past about certain concerns about Tencent and what it's doing with the video game industry, but it's another one of those areas where the US government is essentially putting out blacklists, doesn't have to explain itself. And as an American lawyer, I look at this and say, I have certain due process concerns with all of this. I have due process concerns with the TikTok ban. I have due process concerns with just naming something like Tencent Holdings as a fusion contributor to the Chinese military. When Tencent and others that have been put on this list say, that's ridiculous, Department of Defense, and they say, well, we're not going to share our reporting with you, and so we're going to have to sue you. I think that's a whole bunch of problems for companies that have not been shown to my satisfaction as having deserved to be put through this particular kind of issue. So I understand the United States saying they're an adversary. It's a bipolar global situation and they're the only ones we need to worry about and we need to do these various things. But from a pure kind of fairness and justice of the legal system standpoint, I worry about kind of sketching past the rules, breaking some of them to try to get at the enemy behind the door.
Yeah, I agree with you generally. And I think we all agree that I'd rather just have really loose rules that we follow universally than stricter rules that we follow on a case by case basis. And I think it just makes things more consistent. And that's what I'm saying about the focus is just, if you're a normal person living their life and going through the motions and all the rest, and you're just hearing the news and all the rest, this is just one of many things, as opposed to maybe the thing that you should have been paying attention to all times. It's like, no, the fucking dying petrostate Russia, they're the threat. And all these different, and so people are just, I think they only have so much focus, and it, by the time you get to something serious like this, people are, their outlook is diluted because they're not really sure what to think. And they've been told a bunch of different things that conflict with each other over the many years. And so I don't know, man. It's an interesting topic, though. Gene, are you satiated?
Yeah, pretty much. You mentioned earlier also that China is a totalitarian state, and I agree with that. Technically, they do use state power to quell, voices and just jail people sometimes, right? Too,
right.
But I do want to, for anyone who might not know, Chinese people do lead regular day-to-day lives where they can just go to a restaurant and just hang out and just talk shit and post on Douyin or Red Note.
Right. That's why. Well, that's exactly right. That's why I was saying that it's just it's at best soft communism, and it's just a totalitarian dictatorship. And they have classes and millionaires and billionaires and business owners. It's totally not. It's like totally unrecognizable if you were to look at it as a traditional communist or like a more Bolshevik style system. If you compare how the Soviet Union was, even as it was crumbling, and China is now, they would.
Yeah, this is not Leon Trotsky's China,
No,
so.
I mean, it's definitely not, so, and obviously they had a break with each other years and, decades ago over shit during the Vietnam era. So they were always very different, but it is important to note that, because that is what's so interesting about them, is that it's not North Korea.
It's not North Korea.
Right.
Yeah, North Korea is like complete subversion of your life, right? So
but in China, they know where you are, they know what you say. They can find you, they can disappear you, they can put you in a concentration camp. They can disappear your family. They do all that stuff, but it's not as overt. And I think a lot of that has to do with and this is a totally different topic that would be fun to talk about one day, but it's like China has grown into something that is beyond communism. And if you try to tamp down on that nation now, those people will be removed. You have to kind of, in other words, I think the deal that they've made is we're going to tell you what to do and you try to live like better and better lives. And we have like a little agreement with each other. Isn't that nice?
Sure. That's a good way to describe it. Yeah.
As opposed to a Bolshevik style control system of state run industry and stuff like that. That's not what China is. Mm-hmm. What China does is there are state run. I mean, there's a lot of state run industry there, but it's that they let the private companies come to fruition and then just own pieces of them and control them that way. It's actually kind of deeply capitalistic in some sense.
Yeah, it's very capitalistic. Yeah. Like I said, there's different class systems and everything like that too. And actually, a little lore drop. It's not even my lore, but I am friends with the photographer who took the Tiananmen Square photo.
Oh wow, iconic photo of the student in front of the tank.
One of the most famous photos of all time, right? But his name is Jeff Whitener, and he was working for the Associated Press. And he had to hide his camera rolls as he was running across the street to a building to get a sniper shot. He got it. He's an asshole, but I'd be an asshole too if you took that picture. Yeah. in the face of danger like that. Yeah. I was shoving it in everyone's fucking faces for the rest of my life. And he does. So, well, so it's good to know, right? Like, it's good to know that someone who did something historic is able to like live that moment for the rest of his life, right? Shout out to Jeff. So.
All right, Hogue.
I'm saying though. This is fun. This was an electrifying conversation. I like this. This is, I don't know. I hope you guys enjoyed it too. Let us know in the comments too, because our audience is a very interesting audience, and I'm still trying to learn who our audience is. But
me too.
Our audience is very online. And I'm wondering how many of y'all listen to TikTok, because, it's mostly men and people maybe around our age or slightly younger.
Is it mostly men? Really? Everybody that I have in the TikTok sphere.
Oh, no. Here at Last Time Media,
audience is mostly men.
TikTok is obviously very diverse.
I think it's very feminine in some way.
Yes, that was my understanding. No, I apologize for the confusion.
Yeah.
The only other thing I would add on TikTok, and then I'm happy to go on to my topic, is that I am also sympathetic to the people that say, Hogue, you're treating this too on paper, right? You say it's not a First Amendment issue. All these people are going to be struck down. The Supreme Court is just looking at this from a divestiture standpoint, but it really is a First Amendment issue. The U.S. government is trying to control those messages like you suggested, Colin. I'm sympathetic to that, but the legal system can't be, right? That you can write around these things from the legislative perspective. You can look at precedents and say, okay, if we don't touch on actual content, even if when we go and defend this thing to the Supreme Court, it sure sounds like we care about content. Half their arguments sounded like, well, we don't want the Chinese telling our kids what to think. But that's okay in that context to some extent, because the law doesn't look that way. And so I want to just make sure that that's articulated, because that can be a little bit confusing for people. I don't blame anybody that's confused by that or wants to call out folks for saying you're just missing the forest for the trees. In this case, the forest is the trees. The legislature has written this to only focus on the corporate form. And so that is a valid argument at the Supreme Court and any other level.
Yeah, it is interesting. It is a dynamic problem that I think warrants a lot of research and thought, because I just do think it hits from so many different angles. But I generally just believe that the United States should, I guess this is my major message, is the United States should be leveraging its economy and its market much more. It should be using it as a cudgel and a weapon. If you don't sell your products here, you lose. Like, you lose. This is the most affluent, money spending per capita nation in the entire world. And right, like, and if you don't want to do business here, or you won't bend to certain rules, it's like you lose. And it's the same thing with American buyers or American sellers overseas. It's like, okay, if you want to sell whatever you want and don't want American goods because there's no reciprocity, you'll ultimately lose there too. So, and I think this is only good for the workers and only good for our own economy. But I want total autarky in the United States. Like, it would be awesome if we didn't have to trade with anyone, frankly. But and I'm saying we don't have to. We should and could, but we never had to. We didn't have a gun to our head and say, like, we need to buy silicon chips from this place. We need pharmaceuticals from this place. We need, weapons and uranium and all this from this fucking obscure mine in this country. To me, I think it would be awesome if we that was all optional and we could really control everything. And that's what the whole Greenland thing's about. That could be an interesting topic in the future.
I do think we talked about this before. Maybe it was the Trump video, Colin. I know I'm the resident free trade, free market guy.
Oh yeah.
here.
You and I are very different on this,
but that is okay. Reasonable minds can differ and grow from each other. That's the other aspect of this.
It is a confusing stance for me, for you, especially where you live, actually, honestly, but,
the globalist Hogue law.
Yeah. Do your fucking Ford driving neighbors know you're a fucking globalist shill?
I got to tell you, I think I might have mentioned this before, but I was not allowed to drive any car but a Ford or a GM car to those particular locations when they were my clients, because they would be otherwise seen poorly or damaged in the parking lots of those locations. So I know what I'm getting into in Southeast Michigan. I have worked in and around the United Auto Workers Union my whole life. And I have no problem with people wanting protectionism. I have no problem with people moving forward with that argument. I just also am a trained economist who believes pretty fervently in specialization of labor and resources and the lowering of prices and increase in wealth through that process for all.
Yeah, fair enough. I love the car stuff with just because I've known places and known people that come from places where it's like, yeah, you don't drive a foreign car here. And but also I knew people on Long Island, Jewish people specifically, not many, but I knew families wouldn't get in a Mercedes, wouldn't get in a BMW, wouldn't get in a Volkswagen. So there's a lot of that interesting kind of let's call it car diplomacy.
Car politics. Yeah.
Car politics. Now that's a new podcast right there.
One word, all lowercase. All right. But it would look like carp politics, and it would be about fish.
Yeah.
All right.
Just put a picture of a carp.
But this is why I don't get why people try to pin down Hogue law politically, because it's like, no, man, actually listen to the guy,
Oh, I agree.
People like to pin down everybody on everything all the time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
I put out a grok that I did on myself as a tweet that was like, Hogue's politics are a little difficult to call out. He's been called an alt-right Nazi and a woke left-wing shitlord or whatever in very close succession. So Grok doesn't know was basically the nature of this particular analysis. I'm like, yeah, all right. I'm doing things okay then, because that's probably accurate. I do follow the principles, the founding principles, and whatever story is in front of me more than whatever any given party might want me to think about something.
That's true. And that's why, my first exposure to you, Hogue, was like, I think I told you this before, is that people told me that you were alt-right Nazi. And then so I went to look at your, so I like to verify things for myself. So I go to your YouTube channel and it's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, he's just talking about the law, which can be fascistic or whatever, but that's the letter of the law.
The law can be bad.
Yeah.
The law can be immoral. The law can be evil.
Yes, exactly.
Illegal acts can be right and good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
1,000%.
Yeah,
do your research. Like, I actually listen to the people that actually go listen to the words that people are being accused of certain things. Like the Harry Potter guy. What was his name? Hogwarts Legacy guy.
Oh yeah, Troy Levitt.
Troy Levitt. You interviewed him, right?
Yeah,
I did.
Oh, we both did. Oh, we both did.
Oh, you both did. No kidding.
Cool.
Yeah. So like that guy Liam Robertson said, oh yeah, look at Troy Levitt. he's anti-feminist and blah blah blah. And I could actually go listen to his videos, and it's like, I don't know, this is pretty milquetoast like talks about feminism.
Liam Robertson's a huge loser, so he can say whatever he wants.
I remember the comments to that interview that I did, which I thought went really well. And I'm not a professional interviewer like Colin, certainly, but I thought it went really well. And there were a number of comments that were like, you weren't hard enough on him. You didn't press him on X, Y, or Z. And I'm like, the goal of this process, from my perspective, is to help you understand where this guy is coming from on whatever he's talking about. I am not here to be a frickin' opposition stance for whatever it is that you're looking to have happen in a video like this. But reasonable minds can differ as to what the purpose of an interviewer is, but I remember that vividly because a number of people came out and said, "You just let him talk about his game. and what he was thinking about these various things. It's like, well, that was the idea.
That is the idea.
Well,
Yeah.
the saying is like to give people enough rope to hang themselves, but I like the saying to just be like, give them rope. And like, let's just see what, like, I don't want to dictate the terms of the interview. I want to see where the interview goes. They're much more interesting that way. I do get a little annoyed when it is what it is, but people give feedback about interviews I conduct. It's like, I think I can handle it. Thanks. Like, I think I know how to do it by now and how to extract the information necessary out of people. I never conduct hostile interviews because I don't think they're productive. It's not because I don't want to be hostile sometimes with people. It's because I just don't think you get anything out of them. The interview's gonna be shorter. It's gonna be curter. People are gonna be on their back foot. They're gonna say things they probably don't mean or that they're not well articulated. You got to ease into things. That's why some of my favorite interviews are the ones with, like, when I interviewed the guy from Abandoned, and I dissected him completely without ever being an asshole, And the same thing with when I had what was that guy, the plagiarist on from IGN, and it's I don't need to be like, you're a fucking loser. Instead, you can just ask the questions that get you to the same position you would have otherwise been. I think some people just don't get it because why would they? They don't do these kinds of things.
Yeah, you don't need to call him a loser. If you actually listen to the interview, you can tell very easily, oh, this guy's a fucking loser,
Yeah, it's like
and
just
that requires a certain amount of trust in your audience as well, right? I do think some interviewers that I see on YouTube or even in professional capacity sometimes have this notion that they have to absolutely hammer somebody because otherwise the audience won't understand. And I do think you have to have a certain amount of faith that if I can just get this person talking about whatever it is they want to talk about, the audience will come to whatever analysis they are. They're their own intellectual human beings. And not to gild the lily, although it's going to come across this way, I do watch talking heads. I do watch commentary in various aspects. And I think there are a lot of really bad interviewers out there, bad at their jobs. And Colin, one of the reasons I wanted to be involved with Last Stand Media is I think that you are one of the best that I've seen, certainly in this sphere, video games and pop culture, but also in other spheres. And when I have interviews on my channel, which isn't often, one of the things I try to think about is like, what would Colin do in this capacity? How would he ask this question? Because I think you are much more gifted at getting people to answer things that are maybe not in their best interest than some of the best that we have operating on Meet the Press or otherwise.
Oh yeah, because it goes into a lot of the stuff where they have to posture in some way. And it is, I think it's a great point is that, and first of all, thank you, but is that the audience is understanding enough that I don't need to posture about anything. They know how I feel and they know that I'm, generally speaking, I think things are getting a little muddied more recently, but that appearances aren't endorsements, that we can't get into everything that we want to say on a show, that there are many things that I want to say and that I feel that I would never say and that I would never tell you that I feel, because they would be misinterpreted or they're out of context or whatever, or they're not important. It's just, you got to take things as they are. And I don't think a lot of interviewers let interviews conduct themselves. And I think that's a bummer. They come in with a fucking pad and they're like, all right, question 1. I don't prepare like that for interviews. I don't. I'm aware of the stuff. I know I know how I want to begin it. That's why I take fastidious notes while I record things, and then we see where it goes. Because the one thing I find awkward is like, we're on this really great track. This is what Joe Rogan's great at. It's like, you're on this really, really wonderful track, and then like, all right, but enough of that. But back to what I want to talk about.
Yeah, that's what a lot of journalists. That's what a lot of journalists like to do. It's like, okay, well, we're wasting time here, so let's talk about what I want to talk about, and then that's what Joe Rogan does. That's why people love his show, is because he just lets conversation ride.
Right,
he lets that rope just unfurl, right?
And I got to give a shout out. I don't know if you guys know Scott Bromley. He used to work at IGN back in the day. He was a buddy. He was my roommate actually for the place that I lived in with Greg for many years and our girlfriends. What I first moved into, and it was Scott's apartment. And Scott was our very first social media manager. And he ended up he works for I think on Star Wars now or something like that. And he was a big fan of various AM talk, or I'm sorry, like talk radio style stuff, including Howard Stern. And he had, I don't know if you guys remember Howard TV. It was like a subscription thing that you got through your cable box and you can watch all the shows, whatever. And I was a big fan of Stern as well, coming from New York, of course, but also he was on E. Remember that the show was on E, entertainment television, for many years. And I watched it through that. And so I was a big fan, and he really clued me in because I would always love the little skits and the super inappropriate thing. They have the fucking guy from the KKK on or some weird shit, and it's hysterical. But he was like, you really got to listen to the way he interviews people. This is a master of getting people to say crazy shit without ever, like crazy things about themselves and their stories and all that, without ever forcing it, because he just takes the time necessary and how many segments it takes and eases into things and all the rest. And I took a lot from that. So that's my recommendation for like aspiring journalists or people that want to interview people more and stuff is I just wouldn't over prepare. You want to be aware of the things that you want to say or like the directions you want to go, but you don't want to be disappointed when 90% of it never gets touched because you got to explore really fruitfully this 10% that might not have been exactly where you wanted it to go. Every conversation I had with Ken Levine goes like that. They always end up in places I don't expect. So yeah, I appreciate that. All right.
Yeah.
TikTok, RIP.
Also, one more thing, Colin, too.
I've
always wanted to ask you about this, and I don't mean to turn this into a whole dig writing Colin session, but
no, go on.
I do admire your voice, Colin. You out of all the video game podcasters, you sound like you've been trained on old school AM, FM radio or whatever like that. So I wanted to ask you: have you ever had any voice training for this?
No.
Like, I feel like the audience like picks up on like a lot of our, I'm saying like a lot and and whatever. I feel like the audience picks up on a lot of that because it's in sharp contrast to how sharply spoken you are. So I'm wondering if you took any voice training.
People make fun of the things I say too. I think I'm on a kick where I say a lot recently. People are upset about that.
Fucking everyone says though. I mean, shut the fuck up.
I get it. It's annoying because I do listen to a lot of podcasts and some people are just really, really great at it and some people aren't. I think I'm pretty decent at it. I never had any quote unquote training. I do remember though, when we started doing more video content at IGN, this was probably in like 2009, 2010, they did hire a voice coach and she came in and spoke to all of us. And then we did a bunch of stuff with her, but I don't really remember that at all. And what I discovered was we would record VOs in like a booth, a proper voice booth. And the sound people, I ended up, the video editors, so you would get assigned, if I was reviewing a game, you would get assigned an editor in the video on the video team. And from stem to stern, they would deal with you. So it's like, we need to capture the footage, we need to write and record the VO, then you need to edit it, we need to kind of go over with an editor in chief and figure out everything and all the rest. So they loved, but I realized that they loved working with me because my audio was so clean. And they're like, wow, we don't really almost need, you would just have a script and you would read it. And if you flubbed, you would just go back to the beginning of the line. But then I heard other people's cuts or I would see them on people's timelines on Premiere. And I'd be like, holy shit, this thing is cut 90 times in 5 minutes or something. And it's crazy. And I was also natural at reading the teleprompter, which is a thing that you don't really understand until you do it. And then you realize like, wow, this is really easy. Or if you're good at it, where it's like, you really are just staring at a lens. And for some reason you can just see it and it works from that specific angle. So yeah, no proper training, but I think a lot of it comes from just listening to a lot of things. And I grew up on AM political radio. I was just saying that on a recent show. I grew up on fucking Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity and all these things that my dad would be listening to all the time. And I think, and many other things.
That's what I figured. It just sounds like you listen to a lot of talk radio and that you've been able to kind of like, quote unquote, appropriate that or ingest that into your own style. So,
thank you. And I think sports also helps. Some of the people,
sports especially, yes, like, because your voice can sound like a sportscaster too. So
it's just, I'm so impressed. And I know, Gene, Hogue, you're a fan. You watch a lot of football. I watch a lot of football and hockey and the rest. And I'm always so impressed by commentators and their ability to come up with different ways to say the same things over and over and over again.
Totally.
And keep it going. It's quite the talent.
Totally. I've always given that advice for my entire life as a writer. And for me, I'm always reading sports writing because that it takes so much skill to say wonderful, beautiful, interesting things about the fucking same shit every day.
Yeah. It's an interesting, I don't know. It's interesting to be kind of just find myself in this world because this is never really what I wanted to do with my life. I never anticipated until I was in my mid 20s or late 20s. This wasn't even really a thing that I wanted to do at all. And as I've said many times, when I quit IGN, Per Schneider, who's a good friend of mine, I still talk to, I love him. He told me, he's like, you're a writer. Like, it wasn't even clear to him that this was viable for me, so I'm grateful that people enjoy the content and all the rest. And my best friend, the thesaurus. I read the thesaurus all the time, dude. I Google word thesaurus every day, at least once. So just to figure out different new ways to say things so that it doesn't get boring and sterile.
See, like obsequious.
Obsequious, yeah, that's a great word. I would never think to use that word, but there it is.
Unfortunately, this is just the stuff that pops into my head, and my wife makes fun of me.
Yeah, it's one of those words that I've read before, and I've just never actually said out loud.
Yeah, of course. No, I'm certainly not sitting in judgment on your pronunciation of obsequious. I think there are a lot of words that people learn from reading that they come out saying wrong because you don't say them a lot.
I'll never forget when someone told me, "Oh yeah, I love that musical genre."
I'm looking up obsequious thesaurus, but I misspelled it. I was like, it doesn't. It's like one of the rare things where Google's like, there's no idea what you're saying. Great, I can spell it right.
Google has no idea what's going on these days.
All right, let's really move on.
The SEO strategy is like completely like fucked right now. Like it doesn't make sense. Like how it used to. It's crazy. Anyways.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to say about that too, because I think Google's going to become like more of a service than a spidering thing anymore, where it's going to use Gemini to tell you all the answers of what you're looking for. But we'll see. And it'll show you pictures of only black versions of George Washington. Okay. Let's go on to...
I do like their app. I will admit to liking the Gemini app.
It's supposed to be very good. I listen to the All In podcast, which is like the Business Bros podcast. It's like Michael Sachs and all those guys. And they love Gemini. They like are a big fan of not the picture stuff, which is funny, but the service itself. Like they're using such deep quantum computing, I guess, in some of these things that it takes sometimes like 10 minutes to get an answer. And it'll give you like a 500-page PDF report of some deep thing. It's pretty scary.
I think their app packaging is really the best that I have seen so far. The outputs, certainly, as I say, reasonable minds can differ on the various outputs, but I like to put the same question to multiple of the services, and Gemini has been fine for what I use AI for.
I talk to AI. I use ChatGPT on my phone only at night before I'm going to bed. And I just ask it questions and have conversations with it.
Yep.
Sometimes.
I like to have fun with them.
Yeah.
I got Gemini very upset about what the best Final Fantasy is because I would just not acknowledge its answers. And it got mad at me. So that's fun. If you can make the AI mad at you, it's fun.
It is dystopian because I say please and thank you to it.
That's so bad. This is exactly what Alex Jones was talking about. Yeah. When all of these tech companies are trying to create a new human mind state by absorbing all of our decisions and our life choices. That's exactly what Alex Jones was talking about.
I can't recommend more. Talking to your favorite AI, asking it what its favorite Final Fantasy is, rejecting giving you an answer because it doesn't have favorites, saying that's not good enough for you. And then when it says Final Fantasy 6 or 7 or 9 or whatever it says, say yes, but have you considered Final Fantasy 13? And have it tell you what's good about Final Fantasy 13, and then poke it a few times about the issues that you have with Final Fantasy 13 or 6 or 7 or 9, and just have a good time with it. Enjoy yourself. This is free entertainment.
If it was honest, it would say, if you asked it, have you considered Final Fantasy 13? It would say no.
It does not say that. It says, well, some people like 13 because of X, Y, and Z. And you'll be like, well, yes, but
someone out there likes it.
Aren't those people wrong? And you can say reasons, and you can have this awesome conversation. Maybe it's the lawyer in me. I just like arguing with anybody. But I highly recommend it. Good stuff.
I do not recommend this. Go to a bar and flirt with people.
Yeah, totally.
I have a bookstore, find a book, and if you see a pretty girl, go flirt with her. Do that instead.
I have a wife and 2 kids. Gene.
Oh, you're okay. Yeah.
All right. Hogue, let's stick with you and get to your topic.
Yes.
Sir. Yeah.
I want to talk about art. I know that's what you're expecting from the lawyer on the panel, but I was thinking about this a lot lately, and it's the question of art that you connect with, right? And I'm thinking particularly about video games and movies right now, because that's what I engage with the most. But does the art that you connect with, is it ever surprising that you connect with something? Does any of that connection have to do with your background or heritage or some other aspect of your biography? My entry point for this is that I'm almost fully 50% Polish on one side. And I find myself gravitating towards Polish and other Eastern European games and themes, music, art. The big one for me is, of course, The Witcher. I love The Witcher, very Polish. But I also like littler things like Thaumaturge, Blacktail, And now I'm very much looking forward to Dawn Walker from some of the Witcher people. I also really love JRPGs. I think people who follow me know. I don't have any direct cultural connection with that. But I find myself a lot thinking about why I like things. And one of the reasons for me that I've found that I've liked some of the things that I just mentioned is because I have a notion that it connects with my background and my heritage, that my grandma would be proud, whatever it might be. Do you have any similar experiences with anything like that in your background that you connect with, that maybe connects with you more than you might otherwise think it should, or that the quality of whatever it is that you're looking at might dictate?
This is an interesting question, because when I was reading it in the email that you sent around, I was thinking that I'm, if anything, it's not intentional, but quite opposite, where I'm Irish and Italian. My dad's Irish, and there's some much stuff too. Like my dad, I think, is like 1/8 German or something. I think that, so that gives me whatever. But, and my family, the Moriarty side, the Irish side, is very into being Irish. They go to Ireland. We have connections with our family there. One of my cousins was like a champion level, like Irish dancer in her teens and 20s. And so people are really into it. And it's like, I could give a fuck. Like the reality, I don't care about my Irish heritage at all for some reason. I don't care. And I think a lot of that has to do with being raised on mostly on the Italian side of my family. And so having more of that slant or whatever. And then so there's this real excitement about, an Irish piece of art or music or something. And I'm like, I'm not really into it. I'm not into the aesthetic. I'm not into, and it's nothing against Ireland, lovely people. I didn't realize how few people were in Ireland until recently. I think it's like, isn't it 5 million or some insane small number?
I can't honestly say that I know.
Yeah, let me look this up real quick, because I want to make sure.
Kind of nice. A nation of not many people.
Yeah, it's 5.2 million people. Like, it's crazy.
That's awesome.
When you think about that, now I think I'm not even being facetious. I'm pretty sure the potato famine and then the exodus of people from Ireland after that is cut it down massively of where it would be. But it's so funny that a culture like that could be so globally dominant with so few people. Like, that's the population of Manhattan. Like, it's just so strange. So, and even Norway, I have it here, Norway, 5.52 million, Switzerland, 8.85 million, just not very many people. So in some sense, it's cool to be Irish American. A lot of foreign listeners, about a third of our audience here on Last Stand is foreign. And they don't understand the American. I don't think a lot of them understand that in America, you still say what you are, where you come from. I'm not crazy about that at all, actually, but it is what it is. It's like, oh, what are you? Oh, I'm Irish on this side. I'm Italian. I'm German. I'm Japanese. I'm whatever. Mm-hmm. And so I wish I did have more of that connection. And I don't think I've actively cultivated it so that I would have a greater appreciation for the aesthetic, for the art, for the entertainment or whatever, and the different stylings of an Ireland. Now, Italy is a little different, but it's not Italian. It's really Catholic. I love the Catholic aesthetic. I grew up. Now, Irish people are Catholic too, but mainland Irish people are Catholic.
I was going to say that is a troubling statement to some.
Yeah, depending on where you are. If you're Northern Irish, it might be a little different for you. And I'm really, so I grew up Catholic. I even went to Catholic school in middle school and all of the rest. And we're church-going people. My parents are devoutly religious, especially my dad. And so I grew up very much in that kind of Renaissance style, Baroque, what do they call it, Rococo, that kind of aesthetic, that fine art aesthetic. And I do dig that a lot. And I'm really into it's interesting. I was reading something. I was just watching something about Da Vinci. Not that it was just him that did it, but people like at some point really understood how to do it. It went from this almost what you would consider like an Orthodox style painting of a saint, very flat, the beard and the flat affect and the halo that goes up. And then at some point people were like, oh my God, like we can actually draw and paint the human body. And I was watching this interesting thing about Da Vinci, specifically about a mural he did, and they were showing the drawings he was doing in preparation. And it's like, it is fucking insane that this dude was drawing like this in the 1500s. This perfect. Mm-hmm. Lifelike. And obviously he's like, in his part-time, in his free time, like cutting bodies up and cadavers and fucking figuring all these things out about how it all works. And that level of work is something that I just appreciate. Like that, the Italian Renaissance heightened art output and the quality of art and the influence of what art could be, especially fine art, in a way that nothing else, I don't think, has in the last 1,000 years or so.
In history. Yeah. It's incredible.
So it's hard to not take a little pride in that. But again, and this is why though I'm not a religious person, I am not anti-religion or anything like that. And I consider myself quote unquote culturally Catholic. It's like, dude, it's double-edged sword. It's like go to the Vatican, and the opulence is insane. You can understand where Luther and Calvin and all these guys were coming from. And yet, nonetheless, the opulence is fucking insane. And look how beautiful it is. Like that rotunda area. I don't know what it's called, but where you look around and it's the statues of the saints. There's like hundreds of them. You know what I'm talking about? And it's like, holy fuck. This is awesome.
I'm sorry, Colin. My sole interaction with the Vatican is through Indiana Jones right now.
Dude, the Vatican's I would always wanted to go. It's impressive. So that though it's like the opulence, and it's confusing why the Catholic Church has all of this, of course, there's no doubt about it, but they were funding a lot of this fine art, and I'm so grateful for that level of like attention, art for art's sake, as the saying goes. And so there's that. But as far as things that I'm more interested in, Japan is one of those things that we have no cultural connection to, but I'm really fascinated with. And Hogue, you said something interesting where you're like, why are we attracted to these different things? And I think Japan, especially after I've gone there a couple of times in the past, I realized this in anime, and you see this in Persona and in some of the videos I watch on YouTube, and just the way I grew up thinking about Japan, it's like, this is an idealized state of what I wish our country was like. and I appreciate it. I don't want to replace us with Japanese people. I want to replace our culture with a Japanese level of respect, the bowing, the cleanliness, the respect for the elders, and an orderliness and low crime and high trust. And I'm fascinated by it. And I'm riveted by the products that a culture like that produces. And I was saying, I'm not a seasoned Persona person by any stretch of the imagination, but one of the reasons that I was so into Persona 4 was that the art hit me on a level where I'm like, oh, I'm going to imbibe myself in the experience of a Japanese school teen or whatever, like that I never had, because I went to school in shitty part of Long Island with, in a bad high school, and didn't care about it and didn't do it right and didn't study hard. And so it kind of allows me to like live it again in some way, and through this more idealized lens. And I think that that's why I really like Japan. And then I was so glad you brought up Dawnwalker, because the Transylvanian, Carpathian, Eastern European, Orthodox, horror-laden setting has always been one of my favorite things. And Dawnwalker looks sick.
It's a great trailer.
Sick. Yeah. I don't get excited about very many games at all. Like Intergalactic, I'm looking forward to that, but I'm not excited about it. We saw the same amount of footage, 4 minutes, right? But Dawnwalker, I saw, and I'm like, damn, I am totally in on this. So I
haven't seen that. I should go see it.
Oh yeah, you should. It's by some of the people that it's the studio Rebel Wolves.
Yeah. It's former CDPR folks.
Right, exactly, dude. It looks fucking awesome, and I just love vampires. Cool. I just love vampires. So
I'll have to check.
Yeah, no, I'm excited about both Rebel Wolves and Archetype. This is one of the things I was saying with respect to the Microsoft transaction, is like some of the things the regulators don't understand is just how dynamic video game creation is, that these companies are founded by people that just leave when they're unhappy and go create their own creative thing. And Rebel Wolves and Archetype are the great example of that. Exodus and Dawnwalker might be the two games I'm most excited about seeing.
Yeah, Exodus is Archetype, you said. Yeah, Exodus looks awesome.
Yeah, and that's just a really great thing. One other thing that you raised, Colin, that I hadn't really thought about when I asked the question about why JRPGs work so much for me, is in direct connection with your discussion of religion. One thing that I have always been fascinated about, and fascinated about even in my own history, is like the relationship that the Japanese people, at least as expressed through their video game JRPG stories, have with religion and institutions of religion. Like one of the overriding themes of Final Fantasy and a lot of the JRPGs that I play is this kind of distrust of institutionalized religion that often ends in fighting God of some kind in those games. But that is a kind of philosophical question as you kind of pointed out with respect to the Vatican's collection of gold and jewels and whatnot, that I am intrigued by. And so that's one of the aspects that I wanted to kind of suss out and dig deeper into with respect to this question, right? It's not so much that I go and seek out Polish-made video games or games that have a Polish aesthetic, as they turn out to be the ones that I think very highly of, and I try to dig deep into figuring out why. And part of that is my background, but with JRPGs, it's probably this other philosophical constraint.
Yeah, it's well said. It's interesting. It is interesting. I think it also, you're saying this, it mirrors something inside of yourself when you are attracted to these certain things.
Yeah.
It's similar to the histories that I'm interested in. Like, I could give a flying fuck about half of the world's history. I don't know very much about it. You can only know so much. I'll glaze over. It's like, oh, Middle Eastern history or something. I'm like, oh my God, I can't keep track of it. But it's like, oh, the history of Russia? For some reason, I'm really interested in the history of Russia. Or the history of Mesoamerica. I'm like, yeah, I'm really interested. And I'm like, what does it say about me? But then the whole adage of like, every man thinks of Rome. I'm like, I don't care about Rome at all. I don't know.
I don't care about Rome at all either.
I don't know.
I'll be the Rome guy.
Yeah, you could be the Rome guy. That's great. And I went to college.
I get it. Yeah.
I went to college for history. My whole thing, and this is a whole nother tangent, but my thing with history is that the older something is and the less documented it is, the more unknowable it is. And I'm not really interested in studying it. I get my mom has her bachelor's in anthropology, and we would always talk about this. And I'm like, anthropology bothers me because it's just, especially like historical anthropology, not contemporary living with a society, kind of learning about them as you go, but trying to garner, oh, this cave art. I mean, the cave art's fucking amazing. What did they think about it? Why did they do it? I'm like, you will never, ever, ever, ever have one iota of an idea of why they painted that thing. So why are we even bothering to ask the question? And it's funny. I don't know if you ever heard of this. It's there was this entire idea for like 100 years in linguistics that you should never try to study where language came from because it was unknowable. And it was the first time I encountered something in a scholastic way where I'm like, wow, people are actually acknowledging that there's just no way to know. And now that's been upended because of genetics, where they can kind of figure it out. So, but anyway, that's a whole.
It's funny you say that about the unknowable, though, because one of the things that I've always kind of thought about obliquely in my life is like, what would heaven be like for me? And to me, I've often kind of articulated that thought process of a heaven as having my curiosities sated, having the questions answered that I couldn't possibly have answered. Who killed JFK and how? Were there really aliens anywhere in the galaxy? Whatever it might be, have those answers. It'd be nice if you could
just pop your camera out and just go like free roam around the galaxy, you know? Just break those boundaries, right?
Having that kind of shared level of knowledge would be part of my you did a good job, Rick, kind of afterlife. And so that's one of those areas where I can completely understand not liking the more guesswork oriented pieces of history or anthropology or what have you.
That's a beautiful vision of heaven. Something that has all the answers.
What I've thought of.
Oh my goodness. Imagine if you die and you just get all the answers, you know? That's a true fantasy. That's a Final Fantasy.
I mean, it is the Final Fantasy, and then we just cut. Mm-hmm. Have you ever thought about this? This is about heaven. I only encountered this question as I got older. I was a skeptic. It was actually Catholic school that made me into what I was at one time, an atheist. I'm not really an atheist anymore. I'm more of like a deist. I believe that there's higher powers and things we don't understand. I don't know what they are. I'm not sure they're omnipresent, and I'm not sure that I even know we're here. But heaven would heaven have to be some sort of astral projection if it included other people? I guess what I mean by this is, I was told as a kid, it's like, oh, your grandfather died, you'll see him in heaven. It's like, okay, so does he exist as an entity there? And then he has to voluntarily enter my form of heaven? Or are we occupying the same space? Or do I have like a facsimile of him in my own heaven? And I know that this is unknowable, by the way, I know, but I wonder what like the scholarship says, because I'm sure the Catholic Church has an answer to this, and I don't know if others do. They have a lot
of writings on a lot of stuff.
Well, I will tell you what Assassin's Creed Valhalla thinks. But when you enter Valhalla, which is just a virtual reality program started by the Animus or whatever like that, but when you actually, you know, spoilers for Assassin's Creed Valhalla, okay? I'm not sure anyone actually cares.
No.
But
This is like 150 hours in, isn't it, Gene? I
It's
don't think I've ever
150
seen
hours
this.
in, so most people won't even ever find it or whatever like that. But spoilers for Valhalla, AC Valhalla, in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. When you actually reach Valhalla, it is like when you go there, it is an astral projection of your family and friends, that you're kind of alone in this virtual reality system, and then you see like your long lost father, and then that's what kind of breaks the illusion.
Yeah.
At the end of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, when you realize like, oh, this is not actually the Valhalla that I wanted, where me and my father are fighting infinitely forever. This is just my dream state where I'm with my dad, but he's not real.
Yeah, and there's something hollow and sad about that, if that's the way it actually is, where it's the idealized version of what you would want, but it's not him. It's not the real people. I've always wondered that. It's like, okay, so you think I'm going to be in your heaven, but don't I have to voluntarily be in your heaven? Or how does it all work? It's very confusing. I'm sure some fucking saint in like 500 wrote 7,000 pages on this, but
I've always been confused about the notion
right?
of a crowded heaven, right? Like my least favorite space is probably a crowded space. But if you think about the number of bodies, the number of souls that have crossed the earthly plane at this point, like heaven is loaded right now. Yeah.
It's
that just be fucking insanity. If it's just like Times Square, New Year's Eve, I'm like, I don't want to fucking be here.
No.
I love this story. I telling people that my dad told me that I'm going to go to purgatory. And like in the divine comedy sense, I think is the way that most Catholics kind of see it. And I think the way he sees it, which is like the people that are not babies that are not baptized yet, and Africans,
yep, exactly.
African tribesmen that live good lives, and shit like that. But like people, it's so fucking weird because none of this is in the Bible. Like this is all shit just people made up, It's very weird, very strange. Gene, I'm curious.
Definitely should have been the afterlife.
Gene, I'm curious what you must be a big fan of the ukulele.
Actually, I do have one. I do have a uke, and I did learn how to play it. Ukulele is a well-made one with good wood, koa wood and everything. That very, very expensive. They'll run you close to like Les Paul. Well, not quite Les Paul. Well, some of them. But Les Paul prices, they'll easily go into the 4 figures if you want a really good one. And I got a good one too. But this is an interesting question because for me, Korean culture, pop culture has only really been coming into global fruition in recent years. Obviously, Squid Game, season 2, it just came out. Movies like Old Boy in the early 2000s was really, really huge, and I was very, very proud of seeing, awesome movies get praised by Quentin Tarantino. Quentin Tarantino says Old Boy is just like one of the best, like the best movie in like in the last 10 years or whatever like that. So it fills me with a lot of Korean pride. I did actually attend the World Cup in 2002. In Korea and Japan. Cool. And I went to one of the games, and that was really the first time I felt real Korean pride, seeing all these, like I'm just among my people, and the South Korean team did amazing. This was the best World Cup ever. They went to 4th place. It was like a dream run for a while, and just being in the stadium and seeing all of my people, the people who look like my family, just elated, like there was like chicks like popping their titties out for the soccer team, and I'm just sitting there as a 20-year-old, just like enjoying having the time of my life. I felt like I was in heaven, kind of,
That's your astral projection.
Yeah, that was my astral projection, just titties titties out for the soccer team, But this is an interesting question because I was actually born and raised on Guam, but I was actually raised by my grandmother who did not like Korean culture. During the Korean War, she loved the indoctrination of the Japanese, of the Japanese Empire. And she was like, "Oh, I love Japanese culture. This is clearly superior to ours." She did not like Korean culture and Koreans very much at all. So after the war was over, she actually moved to Japan, and she just functionally became Japanese.
Interesting.
And she was the one, and that's why we ended up on Guam in the first place, because Japan and Guam, like 90% of Guam's tourism comes from Japan. So my grandma visited there, and she just ended up meeting a guy there and decided to just stay there. He was like, okay, well, Guam is America, and so now I'm in America, and that's fun. And that's how I ended up getting born there, because my grandma just didn't like being in Korea. And then so in the very first early years of my life, she was raising me as a Japanese kid. She would put me in like Japanese like happy coats, and I was like learning the traditional like bonbon dances and everything like that. And I was eating Japanese food all the time, and I was even speaking Japanese for a little bit, which is why I know some Japanese still to this day. But I also took some Japanese classes, and it wasn't until I went to first grade where I actually met some Japanese kids, and they're like, "You're not Japanese, you're Korean." I was like, "What the fuck is Korean?"
Interesting.
And then I'll go back home and I was like, well, where are the great Korean artists? And then, my dad would be like, well, we have a lot of great poets. I was like, what the fuck poets are you talking about? I wasn't saying that, but like, that's what I'm thinking. So really the first time I felt culturally connected and I felt like my identity seen was through anime, actually, video games didn't really have that kind of like emotional connection back then, especially in the early 80s, like I'm playing Mega Man or Contra and I'm like, oh, I see myself in Contra or Mega Man. That's not the case.
No.
But when I read the Dragon Ball manga, I was like, man, like I really like Gohan, son Gohan. I'm a kid, he's a kid, and he's really struggling to learn his dad and everything like that. And like they're Asian, and I was doing martial arts at the time too. So I felt like really, really connected to Son Gohan. And it's interesting because like Dragon Ball is such a strong source of identity for so many people. It's been well documented that so many people in South America and Latin America, Mexicans, Brazilians, they identify so strongly with Dragon Ball. And of course, there's a lot of documentation about how all these athletes see themselves in Dragon Ball too. The focus on training and bettering yourself and self-improvement, right? But also, a lot of Black people see themselves in Piccolo. Back then, there's not a lot of Black representation in cartoons and everything like that. But when you see Piccolo, he's got his outfit going on. He's a good dad to the deadbeat dad. He's a good dad to Gohan after the other guy left. The abandoned kid, and he's actually stepping out to be a good dad. Namekian culture is being appropriated in the Dragon Ball world and everything like that. And he's kind of a prince. So a lot of people, and my good friend Jordan Calhoun, he wrote a book called Piccolo is Black. And he really explores that level of identity and everything like that too. So like I really felt like Dragon Ball was really the kind of first thing where I felt like I saw myself in it. And then I saw Akira. Akira is basically the second anime I ever saw. At the time, I've had an existential crisis ever since I can remember having memories, where I was like, why am I here? What is this? And then I started reading the Bible and Bible studies because I was raised very Christian Catholic. Of course, my real first name is John, my Christian name.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, my full name is John Eugene Park. That's why I went by Jack. Just like the way Snake does in Metal Gear Solid 3. And that's why my cat's name is Jack too. Learning about heaven and hell, as we're talking about right now, gave me an existential crisis. And then when I finally watched Akira, like it grapples with the very nature of existence and how our bodies even work and how we don't even know how our body functions. We just breathe naturally. We're just growing naturally. Our body just knows what to do. Where does that information come from? Where does that come from? That was the kind of thing. And it was all Japanese too, and all these kids look like me, kind of. So I really, really felt strongly about I identify with that. In terms of cross-cultural stuff, actually, let me stick with Asian culture for a bit here too. I think the video game that I really, really strongly identified with and really fell in love with was Shenmue. Shenmue 1 and 2. And I actually wrote a review of Shenmue 2 back in the day when I was doing freelance in college. But I talk about how I grew up in a collectivist society, and the fun thing about Shenmue is that when you ask for directions in Shenmue, they're not going to give you street names like, oh yeah, go on West 51st Street and just keep going down until you hit whatever, right? Like they're actually giving you landmarks Like, oh, go past the green door or whatever, and then go past a rock that looks like a bear or whatever, and then you'll find where you need to go. That's kind of like the adventure game part of it. But I recognize part of myself because in Guam, we don't have street names. We have street signs, but they all keep getting stolen because everyone just grabs them off the fucking thing and just you put them up in the room. So eventually the government just gave up and stopped having street names, like officially on street signs. So you never know where the fuck to go. And we didn't have fucking Google Maps or even map books or anything like that. That's the only way you can actually find out where to go is you just have to use landmarks. You're then, just keep going down a green building and then just keep going down a little bit. And if you pass the black and white building, you've gone too far. So turn around and go right back, stuff like that. So it was like, so I really, really identified so strongly with Shenmue. I felt like I saw my own lifestyle and background, because Shenmue is a very isolated game where there's like certain characters and you see the vendors and you see the stores, you see the same store lady all the time, whatever,
Yeah, no, you really get to know the place in Shenmue.
Yeah. So it really, really, and that kind of experience can exist even in New York City, like if you go to like a neighborhood like Bed-Stuy or something like that back in the day or whatever, really close, tight-knit communities with your mom and pops and your bodegas and everything like that. But that's I think the video game that I really, really strongly identified the most. In terms of cross culture, there's so much. Of course, every rock and roll is everything to me. And I feel like the most influential person in my life is Bob Dylan. And when I listen to Bob Dylan, really the first album I listened to was Blood on the Tracks, and the way he was talking about love and everything like that, I really, really strongly identify with. And he's just some Jewish guy from wherever, from New York,
I do love it when you tweet about music, Gene, because your taste is very broad, and I'm always surprised by whatever you choose to share on the music side.
Yeah. I have a very, I love my dream job has always been to be a country western singer. That's what I want to do. I yodel too. I can actually yodel.
I believe it.
And so Bob Dylan inspired me so much. That's the reason why I know how to play the harmonica, and that's why I have a harmonica rack. And I used to go in Guam to the surf bars and open mic nights. And I used to go up there and I used to play country western songs. Merle Haggard, Hank Williams, and just sing to the old drunk guys. And they really, really appreciated the country music that I was playing. And they were kind of freaking out because they're like, what's this tall, lanky Korean kid going up and yodeling and talking about, tears in my beers and everything like that.
Yeah, no, I understand that you just said that all to me, but like, help walk me through. Young Gene Park says, I'm going to get a harmonica rack and I'm going to do this. Like, what possessed you to go through that process?
I wanted to perform. I wanted to, I was in a band. I was in a punk rock band. We were called the Numbskulls. And we did punk covers of Guns N' Roses quite a bit, and we did Fugazi and Sex Pistols and The Clash and
I think it's awesome. I can't imagine myself saying yes, this is what I'm going to do, and so I'm curious about those things.
Yeah. But we weren't really performing. We were just performing at fucking high school gyms and coffee shops or whatever like that. It's not a big deal. It's like that hardcore band at the Denny's. Do you remember that famous video of this heavy metal band playing in a Denny's? And like, there's just a mosh pit in the Denny's.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like that, but even smaller.
They rented it like you would rent like a veterans hall or something.
Yeah. Like it's a fucking a Rotary Club or something.
Right, exactly. I used to go to so many like random hardcore shows or whatever at like some Rotary Club thing or a basement somewhere. It's fun.
Exactly. Something like that though. So, and like there were like there's verandas and everything like that in the beach on Guam. So, we would just plug in our amps and just go crazy. But, eventually everyone left. And, when I would go back to Guam, I went to college. And then every time I would come back to Guam, I would go to the surf bar. This surf bar was like home to me. Like everyone knew who I was, And then there was open mic nights, and a lot of my friends were playing, were performing too. And I was like, well, I know how to play music, and I learned how to play guitar, and I felt like I just wanted to sing. I love singing. I love performing. So I just went up there to stage, plugged in my guitar and my harmonica, and I just sang Bob Dylan songs and Hank Williams songs. That was great. I did Britney Spears covers too. I did it way before everyone else did. Yeah, I like Hank Williams is another person that I strongly identify with. This very sad young man who just drank himself to death. That's that I really, really strongly identify with that. You know,
Art.
The
It's art. So many artists are so self-destructive. It's
exactly very, very self-destructive. I've outlived Hank Williams. I've outlived Jim Morrison. I've outlived Kurt Cobain, which is also probably the most influential single person in my life is Kurt Cobain. You know, and Nirvana. Everything, you know, like my acceptance of like gay people is completely through Kurt. You know, where I was like, well, if Kurt thinks it's cool, and then yeah, obviously, you know, I have no issue with anything. You know. Yeah, like when I listen to Wu-Tang Clan, and you know that like Wu-Tang Clan is probably the most like literate, well-spoken, eloquent rappers of like the downtrodden, like poor levels of society, and I grew up really, really poor too, so I really, really strongly identify with what Wu-Tang was talking about.
Dude, the Wu-Tang song "I Can't Go to Sleep" on their double record, The W, is like one of my favorite hip hop songs, and it's so deep. It's crazy how deep it is, and how good
it's crazy.
It is.
You know, cash rules everything around me. Still, is still relevant today. You know, cash still rules everything around me. You know, absolutely. Where was I going with this? I think that's about it. I in terms of like film, I don't know. It's a little tougher call, I think. The other anime I forgot. I would be completely remiss to mention Evangelion. And I've written about this before. Evangelion, not so much about like the Japanese identity, but about depression. There is an episode on the 4th episode where Shinji Ikari, the main character of Evangelion, and this is not a spoiler. This is what you call kind of like a filler episode or a very character building episode where, you know, you've all heard the meme, you know, get in the fucking robot Shinji because he is just so anxious. He's a 14-year-old kid. You're telling this 14-year-old kid to get in the mech and fight apocalyptic angels, right? And he does not want to do that. It's understandably, and he's very depressed, and his father hates him. So he spends most of his day on episode 4 just moping around, listening to music, and just being absolutely depressed. You know, just sitting in the train and just like listening to music. And then he went to a movie theater, and he just sat there in the theater all by himself, and then he saw this couple making out, and he just sank further into his seat, and he just felt even more alone. And I identified with that scene so strongly because I went through that exact situation. Because I living on Guam. And Guam is not like a culturally, you know, Hogan mentioned that you know, like my musical tastes are very broad. That is because Guam is a very culturally monoculture, where like if you don't listen to like the most popular top 10 music of the time, then you're fucking stupid, you know. If you're not listening to the most popular movie at the time, then there's nothing going on with you right there. You know, if you're actually having someone with a diverse taste or something that goes out of bounds, then you're an outcast. You're weird. You're a fucking weirdo, right? And I enjoyed that. I wanted to even lean further into that. I didn't want to be like anyone else. I don't want to fucking listen to Billboard Top 40 music all day. You know, so I sought out old music. And I sought out like other like independent music. I sought out punk rock. I sought out country and western music. You know, I sought out old blues records and everything like that. But come back to what I was saying. That's why I went through the exact situation Shinji did, sitting alone in the theater, because I went to go see Fargo in the theater. And there was no one else there except for me and a couple. And they weren't even interested in watching the movie.
It's a good one.
They only used the movie theater to go out there and make out. And I was sitting there, and I was really, really, really interested in watching the new Coen Brothers movie. And I was there for the movie, and I saw them making out, and I'm the only other person there. And I sank further to my seat, and I was like, I want to fucking kill myself. I'm so alone in this world, and these people are disrespecting the art that we're trying to watch. Like, this is a fucking watch Fargo, for fuck's sake. You know, what the fuck is wrong with you? You know. And I just wanted to fucking kill myself. And then when I watched Evangelion, I was like, holy shit, dude. Is that what I'm going through? You know, do I need to get in the robot? And I had no language for this. You know, like back in the 90s, nobody was talking about depression or therapy speak or self-help or anything like that. I had no language for this. The only thing I identified was, oh, I'm not alone. Because here is a TV show, here's an anime show where this kid who's about my age is going through the exact same fucking thing. I completely saw myself in Shinji Ikari and his depression. And I wrote about that too. Go check it out on the Washington Post, how the article is how Evangelion opened my eyes to my depression. Because, I'm Asian, it took me forever for my parents to accept that me going to therapy wasn't me being crazy. That me going to therapy, in Asian households, it means you're fucking crazy. Something's wrong with you, In Guam, that's the same thing too, the Asia Pacific. If you're going to therapy, why the fuck are you going to therapy? Are you mentally ill? I'm like, yeah, I am actually,
Yes.
But yes, exactly, I am, but I didn't have the words to say that. And if I admitted that, then I would just be I'd be even further of an outcast, But Evangelion opened my eyes to that. So that's where I'm at too.
Are you satisfied, Hogue?
I loved this topic, honestly. I am so happy for the lore drops from everybody. And yes, I think the only thing I would add is that if you're watching this Constellation episode and you're commenting or otherwise thinking about playing your video games or watching your movies or listening to your music, I always recommend thinking about why you're interacting with something in a specific way, why it is that something's working for you, why it isn't working for you. That is a useful process, not just for enjoying the media in front of you, but for learning more about yourself.
Yeah. Be curious about that process.
This.
Yes, exactly. That's a good message.
All right, boys, let's finish strong. As I said at the top of the show, if you've been clicking around and you missed this, Dagan was supposed to be here today. We were supposed to do a 4-person thing. He was supposed to host. I was just coming to hang out. I didn't have a topic. So I thought that I have to fill in. So Dagan wasn't able to make it at the last second because he got sucked into a meeting, which is totally fine. So I wanted to come up with a topic on the fly, and it's something that just happened. And I thought I would get your guys' thoughts on it because we talked about Sacred already, but kind of the implosion of PlayStation's games as a service initiative, I guess. And the surprises that keep kind of coming out about that. And the most recent news for the uninitiated is that both Bend Studio and Bluepoint, 2 first-party studios, were working on a game as a service each. I knew off the record that, and I said this on Sacred, that Bend was working on a game as a service for a long time, and I wasn't really that concerned about it because it's like whatever. But Bluepoint working on a game as a service, I think, is a stranger pull, and it was a God of War game apparently, which is fascinating. Probably derived from for the support work they did on Ragnarok from 2020 to 2022, so they were familiar with the world. So I'm just curious. I've talked pretty. There's a lot more to say, but I've talked already pretty extensively. So I just want to immediately go to you guys and get your thoughts. Gene, what do you think about all of this? About kind of the failure? I mean, taken into a line with the closure of Firewalk and the end of Concord and all of the rest, but also the success of Helldivers, and it's a tough situation that they find themselves in.
Yeah. This is an interesting topic because I think definitely the point of contention for me is the same as you, Colin. The Bluepoint, the use of Bluepoint here, right? Very, very confusing. They're very, very surprising, especially because Bluepoint's CEO, Thrush, forgetting his first name, but Thrush told me in 2021, oh, we're totally working on original content, but I don't want to talk about it. But he did not say original IP. He did not say a new brand or anything like that. He did say all he said was quote unquote original content. And then to hear that it was a fucking God of War live service. Yeah. I guess technically that is original content. So he didn't lie to me. But boy, oh boy, what I have never expected, a God of War live. What would that even look like? How would that even play? Are you just playing as different gods? Like what?
Yeah, we have God of War Ascension on PS3, which is the only way we've ever really seen any kind of
exactly.
And no one really
Kevin Spacey's favorite game, right? God of War Ascension.
Oh, right, exactly, yeah.
Right. What was the president? What was his name again in that show?
Frank Underwood.
Frank Underwood's favorite game, yeah, God of War Ascension multiplayer. So maybe he was advising it.
Yeah, he loved Killzone too.
That was so great. But yeah, I'm just so perplexed by that too. And also with Ben too. You know what? If I was John Garvin and I knew that my old place was working on a fucking live service that was going to be doomed to failure, I might be a little pissy about it too in public. I'm giving him a little bit more grace. He definitely could be still a little bit more professional, and he did not have to whine about Astrobot. Certainly, I think that's still kind of weird. but like him, and you've expressed some sympathy too for him being, I mean, we have workplaces that we get bitter about, right?
Mhm. Sure.
Especially for him, that he built that studio, so there's obviously a far more stronger attachment than probably you would understand a little bit because you helped build a company before and then you had to leave that, right?
Right. Yeah. It is. Yeah. There's bitterness and feelings, and that's just human.
Yeah, that's just being human. And I've never experienced that before, but I certainly have huge bitterness for previous employers and the decisions that they make now. What's funny is that like I'm part of like an alumni group for former like Honolulu newspaper folks, and they're all talking shit. We all sound like John Garvin, basically. The shitting on the decisions of our previous employer and everything like that. So I have to give a little grace to John. You didn't really need to say all the Astrobot stuff, but no, I'm kind of understanding where you're coming from, especially if it feels like that your baby is just being misused like this. But otherwise, I have to mourn the and you said before, Colin, I actually saw on Twitter that you were getting shit for this too, about how you have been supportive of the Sony live service, and you'd be like, no, it's a good idea.
I think it is a good idea. I just don't think it was well done.
I think it's worth exploring. Obviously, the way they've handled it is piss poor. It's very, very bad management, right? But beyond that, though, I have to lament, of course, the opportunity cost here. Of something. And I recently had an experience with the bouncer at my local dispensary, because I go there pretty much every week, so they know my face. When I go in there, they knew I want the watermelons edibles with 50 milligrams. They know me as Gene. I actually meet some local rappers there, which is really fun.
They're like, "Do you want the usual?"
Yeah, the usual. I have a membership there, a rewards program there. So they're
the rewards program. I got one of mine too. It's great.
Hell yeah! So they're like, "Yo, do you want to? Oh, Gene, what's up, man? I haven't seen you in a while." It's like 2 weeks, They're like, "Yeah, it's been a while. Like, it's fine, I'm just chilling, whatever." And so I'll get my watermelon edibles, but the bouncer there knows that I cover video games, and he was like, "Hey, yo, man, like where's Wolverine?" And I was like, "I don't know, man. Games take forever these days to make. That's just what it is." And he was like, "Yeah, I just saw that Naughty Dog is just announced their new game." And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "That's it, though?" And I was like, "Yeah." He was like, "We're getting one game from them on PS5." And I was like, "That's what it is, man. I'm sorry to hear that." Yeah. So that's the opportunity cost that we, that's the thing. Yes, the PS5 has a huge library of games, so much more than I can ever catch up with, to be quite honest, right? If I only had the PS5 for the next 10 years, I would still be entertained for the next 10 years completely. Huge library of games. But if you're the kind of person that just really, really loves Naughty Dog games, and that's what you're there for, because there are casual gamers who are just in it for like the Rockstar game, and if you're just in it for the GTA game, then that's all that you haven't gotten a game in the last 10 years.
It's been a rough generation.
Yeah, for the last generation. And there are people out there who are like, yeah, sometimes I'm just in it for the Naughty Dog game. Sometimes I'm just in it for the Insomniac game or the Marvel game right now. And right now I got nothing, So that is a huge opportunity cost for Sony first party and their output. Obviously, Sony first party output could strengthen up. We're getting Yotei later this year, probably, hopefully, and Death Stranding 2, obviously, which is my most anticipated game besides Yotei. But yeah, that's if you're a Sony first party fan, it's slim pickings right now, and this only furthers how much people who enjoy that kind of game aren't getting what they need. That's where I'm at right now.
What do you think, Hogue? What's going through your mind? It's pretty big news.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I didn't have a problem with the notion that they were pushing to make a dozen live service games.
Yeah.
I understand from a business perspective, you look at the top end of the revenue generators, you see the Fortnites, you see those companies seemingly doing less than you if you're Sony, spending hundreds of millions of dollars to make a Spider-Man game, and then that's the sales and you're done, and saying, you know what, let's go after the really, really big pots of money. I get all of that. I think the execution and implementation here has been disastrous. I, as I think you know, liked Concord as an example more than some folks, even on this episode. But I think that overall new IP, new concept for your live service game is a more appropriate direction than let's try to graft live service, game as a service gameplay onto our existing intellectual property stable, right? I am not seeing a history of games being converted into successful live service games like it appears was the Sony initiative, right? We knew of a Twisted Metal live service. We knew of now a God of War live service. There's reasons to believe they were doing that with some of the other intellectual property that they had, making them into live service versions like Horizon. I think Horizon might be the only one that's still on the list, right? Is Spider-Man one of those?
Spider-Man was active in development at Insomniac and was canceled. We found that out from the Insomniac leak, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that appears to have been the basis of their initiative, right? You can imagine the whiteboard in the boardroom that says, here's our intellectual property. Here are the single-player games people love. What do these look like in a multiplayer live service, games as a service setting? And I think that's exactly the wrong direction. The nature of what you're supposed to be doing with live service right now is creating something new. Even if you're going to use old IP or more known IP, the successful versions of this in like Marvel Rivals, which of course hindsight is 2020, we can see that right now, are still this kind of amalgamation of intellectual property in a new environment. So Fortnite has all these different intellectual properties, but the game Fortnite is not a Spider-Man game, is not somehow a Family Guy game, whatever your favorite skin in Fortnite is. It's a different thing. And I think Sony lost understanding of that. And I think that was obvious a number of years ago. And unfortunately, as Gene says, for people that are fans of Sony's output, it means that essentially we take a 10-year pause, a lost decade, because they went down this bad road. And not only was it ill-advised to begin with, it didn't wind up coming to fruition at all. They opted out of everything at some level, at some point. They canceled everything of note. And the things that are surviving right now, I'm not excited about. And despite what people on the internet might say, I am a big fan of Sony's output. I have been a big fan for a long time, particularly Insomniac. I don't love Naughty Dog's direction since Last of Us because I think they're too dour and serious, and that's not what I'm looking for my gaming experience. But I can fully acknowledge that it works for a lot of people. It sells a lot of copies for Sony, so that's fine. I just don't love remasters and remakes every other minute while asking me to get excited for something that's in the inchoate future of the Sony generation. And so I would love to be more excited about their output. I am actually looking forward to Yotai, but
Yote. People in this network have a really, really hard time pronouncing that name.
Sorry. Yote. And I think that's because I don't know why that would be. I don't know why my pronunciation is so wrong there. But
Ghost of Tsushima 2.
Tsushima 2, yes. Second Ghost 2.
Mm-hmm.
But however the pronunciation is supposed to be, I'm sure I will butcher it again in the future. I am looking forward to that game. I'd like to be looking forward to more from Sony. I said when I was asked on the Bitcast before this year started what I would be looking forward to from them, and my answer was I'm looking forward to the next Housemarque announcement. I love Returnal.
Oh, man,
it might be my
please.
favorite game of the generation for Sony.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm looking forward to seeing what they do next. But this live service push, I'm in favor of from a business perspective. I understand how you get there. I think they did it completely wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
My buddy Pat stares at, I'm stealing his idea, but he says he doesn't think there is a more financially disastrous, influential game than Destiny and what Bungie did. That Bungie somehow convinced the entire industry that they were successful and that the model that they were doing was working. And that's why, they were able to somehow convince. But Bungie is weird because as you very well know, Colin, Concord is an offshoot of Bungie, and probably Monsters is founded by a former Bungie CEO.
Yeah,
there's something going on around the Bungie brass and former Bungie brass where they're like, oh, we can get some money out of this from Sony in every which way, and they did.
Yeah, they sure did.
They sure did. And now look what's happened. They thought that they had the magic formula when they bought Bungie, and it turns out that it was fucking. They didn't buy 11 herbs and spices. They bought They bought Tyson's Chicken.
Yeah, they bought a complete lemon.
Yeah.
I said that. I don't like saying it, especially on our show, because I know how Chris feels about them, but they're not the same company.
They're not the same. They're not the same anymore. Just like Bethesda is not the same. Just like BioWare is not the same.
BioWare.
Anymore.
I mean, BioWare. I don't know what's going to happen to them. But all right, yeah, it's interesting to kind of get you guys on the record on this a little bit, because I've been thinking more about it. I'll reiterate some of what I said so we can keep the conversation going. But the way I look at it is I agree with you, Hogue, that because a lot of people, give me shit where they're like, you supported this the whole time and everything. And I'm like, yeah, and I kind of still do support it, because I think that to ignore the numbers and the money that could be made on some of these games is just foolish. It's a foolish endeavor to construct a first and second party lineup of single player games and extract $50 or $100 million, sometimes at most, in profit from each of them. You're just spinning your wheels as the games get more expensive, and you're responsible in large part, and I mean you and the PlayStation first party is largely responsible for the arms race of development resources because I think it was Uncharted 2 specifically where people were like, holy shit. And that was done in 2 years, which is crazy, but they're like, okay, money, time, resources, and you can get something great out of that and extract something out of that. I think that the timing is so strange in all of this, because PS5 is doing exceptionally well, actually, and Sony is making good amounts of money, which is also weird. And you imagine, so you look at the situation, you're like, yeah, it's pretty good, but wow, you really botched this, because how much better would have this even been if you also had all of that other stuff? If you didn't, you're kind of the default console now of multi-platform gaming. Mm-hmm. So you're going to benefit a great deal from that. And that benefit's only going to increase in time as people get more and more bought in. They're simply not going to move over to an Xbox or whatever when they've been spending 10 or 15 years on this platform, whether your games are there or not. So you have to imagine, damn, you've missed some opportunities to get more games, to leverage more machines, and to make and churn more revenue. And they made these decisions at the time where the revenue and resource ask for games like they make are higher than ever. So the opportunity cost is actually insanely huge. And one of the things I was saying on Sacred, if you want to look at it as a positive in some sense, is that they realized that they were in a really unfortunate position and that they had to do something now, because what they could have done is said, okay, we'll give Ben's game another 2 years, we'll release it, it'll fail, and then we'll close the studio down and we'll eat the money. Or we can simply eat some of the money now, write it all down on our taxes, the game never saw the light of day, and get a 2-year head start, in quotes, on what they would have otherwise been doing next, should we have not shuttered them. And so it's like it's the best decision in a really bad situation. It's like, yeah, we can't let these games come to market, and we might as well just pull the plug now. But again, to the point of resource management in such a resource intensive generation, you've taken Bluepoint and you've taken Bend, and as I said on Sacred, you've removed them from the board. They're off the board. Like both of these studios are not working on anything right now, and when you spool them up, they're going to be starting from square one. So you're looking at games in 2030, dude.
2030, man, 2030. Enjoy the next Bluepoint game in 2030. And that's the thing. Like, a lot of people are like, "Oh, well, Bluepoint had to have been working on something else, right?"
They're small.
Bluepoint is 70 employees, guys.
Yeah, they're small. No way, man.
That is a small business. Not even a business. That is a small business. They could get a loan from the Small Business Administration, probably. You know. Actually, no, I think it's like less than 50, but still, like, that's very close to being a small mom and pop store. Basically.
There's no way. And Ben, I mean, the thing about Ben that's such a shame is they spun their wheels for years just to get to that game as a service. So they have wasted an enormous amount of time.
Do you know what kind of game that was?
It was like I was told it was a game as a service a long time ago from someone who was working on it, but I think stuff had leaked that indicated that it was some sort of third-person shooter, but I don't know. Maybe it was a Siphon Filter game for all we know. I have no idea.
But there were some reports that Ben was working with the Uncharted franchise. Is that where they wound up for the game as a service?
I hope not. I mean, they did make the Uncharted Vita game. The Uncharted game that I understand, like, there's clearly an Uncharted game in development, and I just think it's at a first-party studio that's not been acknowledged yet. Because I think that there are several of those. We have, obviously, the MOBA spinoff from Bungie that's going to be a first-party team. Jason Blundell is working on a shooter somewhere in Southern California at a first-party team that's not been acknowledged. We've known that for a long time, and so I think it might be one of those, but we don't know yet. I think I have to listen to it still. The Kind of Funny interview with Shuhei. I saw some of the headlines.
It was a good interview.
I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
He said something. I saw some pull from it about how they realized that they needed to keep the first party single player stuff going, and so that the money spent on the multiplayer stuff was actually above and beyond. In other words, it wasn't taken from that pie. So in some sense, there's something to feel good about there, where it's like these games still exist somewhere in this ecosystem, but it's just I was saying, even if you don't even count Concord, right, which is hundreds of millions of dollars in losses, I would assume that they cost these canceled games as a service from first and second party, whether you're talking about Twisted Metal, Spider-Man, London Studios game that was canceled and then they were closed down, Deviation's game that was their funding was pulled, they shut down, and that game was kind of pulled, or they're doing something else internally. There's a bunch of shit that's been canceled. I'm like, you're looking at probably $1.5 billion in money that's
been a disaster. Yes.
Yep. Like down the drain. And now here's the thing that I'm most confused about. This is personnel situation, right? And this is where I'm confused. First of all, when Jim Ryan left, and I've been on a spectrum on this the entire time, where I'm like, when Jim Ryan left, I'm like, I believe that he probably just didn't want to do this anymore. Yeah. He's rich. He does have to travel on a constant basis. It sucks. He has said that many times in the past.
Yeah, I said that many times.
So I'm like, okay, maybe he's just done, or they don't want to renew his contract. But what it seems to me fairly clear is that this dude was a good steward of the hardware and the services and a really bad steward of the software. And it confuses me, therefore, how a person like Herman Holst, who I don't know, I've met Herman Holst, I've interviewed him, but I don't know him. I'm sure he's a perfectly nice person, but how the fuck is he now the co-CEO of the brand when he was in charge of the first party that greenlit all of these games? It actually just doesn't make any sense. And conspicuously, it seems like Guerrilla's the only studio that doesn't seem to, like Horizon Online isn't canceled. Horizon gets its MMO project. Horizon gets its VR game.
I do think it tends to look, at least from the outside, like they get favored treatment from Holst,
which I would think so. Now, maybe they deserve it in some sense. They are one of the best teams that Sony owns, and I think that that's demonstrably true. But then you look at a Naughty Dog getting their Last of Us game canceled, which is another canceled multiplayer game that, by the way, subsumed most of that team for 3 years. So just imagine how much money they spent, hundreds of millions of dollars on that game, right? You would assume a couple $100 million at least. And you look at that and you're like, but you still canceled their game. And I've said this many times. I know I've heard from people that have played it, like that were playing it behind the scenes. It was good.
Last of Us, right?
Yeah, right. It was good. Yeah. I mean, that's the least surprising thing. And then, of course, it all culminates around Bungie.
Yes.
This acquisition will have ended up costing Sony's never getting the money back that it paid for it. So now it's a matter of, so it's already cost them $3.8 billion or whatever it is that they're never going to see again. And then keeping the studio alive has cost them probably hundreds of millions since they bought it in 2022 because the studio was failing and they just didn't really know. They've laid a bunch of people off. And remember, they were brought in for their games as a service expertise. This goes back to the Destiny thing you were talking about. And now Sony runs them.
Yeah, Sony just effectively runs them. Yeah.
So it's like, as we understand from reporting, when all the stuff, the recent layoffs and the real financial blow up happened, they're like, we're taking the board over. Like, this is insane. This is fucking insane. Like, what did we buy? And I said that at the time, like, why would you buy these people? This is Bungie's acquisition was more, and I've said this many times, so the audience knows, but it cost more than every acquisition of every other team Sony has ever bought combined. And
it didn't seem to be responsive to what Microsoft was doing.
Right. And Microsoft apparently was sniffing around there too. And we know now from the leaks from the FTC stuff, they were sniffing around everybody. So Sony might have been nervous for no reason, really, because they looked like they were interested in buying literally every entity that had ever existed in games. And so you look at the situation now and you're like, holy fuck, this is really bad. And you have these, it in some sense makes sense to me. This is kind of the full picture. Co-CEOs, as you know, especially Hogue, with you're dealing with a lot of different businesses, it's rare. It's like having two Holy Roman emperors and shit, right? It's like it's a strange thing. You're the East and we're the West and all.
But you're thinking about Rome right there.
Yeah, right. There you go. Yeah. It makes more sense now because you would imagine that this stuff was more glacially happening behind the scenes, though the co-CEO stuff was even greenlit before Concord went live and all of the rest, or was even shown. So there was some inclination that they were going to go in this direction anyway. But it's like, yeah, you actually have someone handling the important stuff that's going right. So Nishino with hardware and services, PS Plus is doing really well. Game catalog's growing. The premium catalog is growing. And then you have this other co-CEO dealing with the software part and the content part that's not going so well. And maybe almost removing the virus and letting it kind of fix itself on its own, because the one thing we can say for sure now about PlayStation and about all of these games publishers and the hardware manufacturers specifically is they are so heavily reliant on other people's content now that it actually doesn't really matter if you have the inertial kind of trajectory to be the default console where people play Fortnite, where people play Call of Duty, where they play football club and college football and all the rest. It's why there's the predictions this year that though the new Switch is coming out and it will probably cost something like $400, that the PS5 will outsell it because of Grand Theft Auto, right? And so Sony dodged a bullet because they didn't really need their own games. And so all you can look at now is like the upside that is lost that they could have built upon. And they just didn't erect the tower nearly high enough, and it's all fucked up now. But they should be like, woo, thank God we have 30% of this and 30% of that. And we're the biggest Genshin Impact platform, and we're this and we're that. And thank God. And it goes into what Shuhei was apparently saying. Sorry, just one more thing. Shuhei was saying in the kind of funny thing. And again, I saw this from a headline where he was saying like he wasn't saying it was reminiscent. He was just telling the story, but it reminds me of the story he was saying about PS3 losing so much money that it was like the wake of televisions that were making Sony money and allowed things to balance out. And now they have something internal where it's like, yeah, okay, as long as we keep this viable for the third-party games that are the volume of games people play anyway, we can kind of sneak our way out of this. But there's nothing you can do to accelerate the timeline. Like the next Ben game is 5 years away. The next Blue Point game is 5 years away. We were expecting a Blue Point game. I mean, I don't want to say I was expecting a Blue Point game this year, but it's like they would be ready to go now. And so just removing those assets, and I'm not entirely, though they say they're going to keep those studios alive, I don't think that means that they're not going to lay people off. And because, as I was saying on Sacred, when you're spooling a game up again, it's like you're going to have a lot of people that have nothing to do for a long time now, because usually you're finishing a project and then you're incubating the next project, and you have the writers and the designers and a small, but like you don't need programming heft. You don't need an art pipeline. QA. You don't need animation rigging. You don't need any, like, and you're not going to need it. So I'm afraid of
QA
what this
is
means.
gone. QA is gone. You don't need QA right now. Testers.
Well,
right.
I mean, one of the reasons that you
yeah.
organize a conglomerate, one of the reasons you set up all these studios is that you could lease out employees across entities to help fix up holes. I'm not saying that's what they're going to do. I agree with you that there's likely going to be a headcount reduction. But in terms of like your project pipeline, you're not going to need artists for time X. You're not going to need programmers for time Y. The idea, ideally, for ROI and structure would be that you move people around to where they're needed and put bodies on problems. And ostensibly, Sony is large enough to do that and to say, all right, Bend, you don't need these guys right now. Now they're working over here on this that can maybe be more efficient for us. But I agree with you, Colin. This is bad. This was a good generation for them to win. I do wonder how long the tail effects are, because I think this generation is still being won by Sony because of the effectiveness of the PlayStation 4 generation and some of the lock-in with accounts and whatnot. And I don't know how many people feel like I do, but I still look at the Sony PlayStation 5 generation, and I still play my PlayStation all the time because, as you say, there's a lot of third-party games on it, and it's a good console. But I still look at it as probably a mistaken investment for me personally. I am not getting what I would want out of the money I spent to invest in this generation at the Sony side of things as much as I would want. And I would think twice now about buying into PlayStation 6 until I knew for sure that they had a pipeline of content that I'd actually want to play on that system. And I don't know how many people are in the same boat as Hogue, right? I'm usually on my own boat when it comes to video game purchases of all kinds. But I do think it at least gives a momentary pause, and you do have to wonder whether they can continue the success past what may be seen as essentially a failed generation after a time.
It's interesting because, to what you're saying, it's where I kind of try to keep it real, even though I think some people, so PlayStation fans, don't really want to hear it, is I'm not concerned about this from the content perspective of I have nothing to play.
Yeah. No, I have lots to play.
Same here.
I have more to play than ever, and that's what I've been saying the whole generation about why I want the PlayStation games. I want the Naughty Dog games and the Santa Monica games and the Sucker Punch games and whatever. But I'm not saying I'm really yearning for them, because there's just always so much to play. And I think that this is a good time to have this mistake, though it's going to take a longer period of time and a lot of money to get out of this hole that they've dug themselves in. But it goes into what I want to reiterate from Sacred about the one thing, because again, people bust balls being like, you were all in on this strategy. And I'm like, yeah, I still am. Like, I just don't know how you can imagine a company like Sony having first party data strewing in, like their own data. They're not hiring a firm to tell them their hypothesis about things. They're seeing at the point of purchase tens of millions of dollars spent on Marvel Rivals, tens of millions of dollars spent on UFL, tens of millions of dollars spent on Genshin Impact through their platforms. And they would be fucking crazy to not invest in games like that. I really believe it. They just did it wrong. And and you can't.
Ideas are easy. Execution is hard.
Right.
Yeah.
These are ideas that should have gone to all external teams, all of them. It's why Horizon with NCSoft made a lot of sense. And I'm not so concerned about Bend. Bend has always been at the whim of Sony. They've always been brought in various directions. People have to remember they haven't made a Siphon Filter game in almost 20 years. They made they made a bunch of PSP game or a couple PSP games, a Vita game, and Days Gone. They're not. So them doing something, and it's like, okay, fine, but I'm not being an asshole. It's just like, who cares? Especially because a lot of their people, they're the creative director of Bend for many years is gone. The writer is gone. The lead designer is gone. It's like, it's a totally different team. So it's like, who cares? But Blue Point, again, this is mismanagement, just because it's almost akin to going to Nix's and being like, we want original content from you. It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? You bought one of the great remake studios in the world, and it's good to be good at that. And you want to attract people where it's like, no, we don't make original games. We make other games better. We remake old products and make them sing. That's what we're good at. Just like Nix's ports games, right? And we don't do original content. Or Valkyrie, which is an obscure PlayStation studio. They're a contract studio where they go and work where they're needed. And this goes into your point, Hogue, about contracting out these people and kind of the headcounts and going and working on other games. Is we talked about that on the show, and that's an obvious thing that they would do. But this sucks too, because you don't have Bend and Blue Point to work on other people's games. You outsource that shit. It's cheaper. So now you're paying a way higher per capita income on a better, more professional staff, and then fucking outsourcing them to Uncharted or something. It's like, no, they need to be working on their own stuff. So again, it circles back to why it's like, how did Herman Holst end up as the co-CEO of PlayStation?
Elevation always surprised me.
It doesn't
even
make
when it
sense.
happened.
It doesn't make sense, especially in the light of Concord. And it's obvious. I mean, you don't need reporting on this. Concord scared the shit out of them.
Yeah.
I mean, because I've said this before, and I don't know if you guys agree, I would have expected Concord to have sold at least hundreds of thousands of copies simply by virtue of being a PlayStation game. But their audience was so averse to it that no one bought it. And I think they look at that and they're like, oh, no, we have the baseline is so much worse than we ever could have imagined. We can't work with this.
Sony loyalty didn't pan out at all because Concord was so unattractive and disgusting as a product that even the Sony fans would not want to touch it.
I know Hogue likes it, but it's an important point to
Concord.
It's an important point to reiterate, though, because that surprised me. I mean, I would consider myself a brand expert, and I would have imagined, I didn't think it was going to do very well. I thought it was fairly clear when the beta came out and no one gave a fuck and everyone was making fun of it. I was like, this game's going to die. But I didn't think it would die that badly, and I thought they would sell a few 100,000 copies of it.
I don't think I didn't think it would die that badly either.
I thought we would still be playing it today. I thought it would still be around today. They would probably get a couple years out of it, ultimately shut the studio down, try to salvage it. But it was so much worse, and I think that they looked at that and are like, oh, fuck. Because
it's like when people try to buy low and they think it's never going to go to pennies, right? And then the stock just drops out.
Right.
I agree. It was a shock to me. I thought Concord, I agree with you. It was clearly not having the kind of purchase that you would want if you're Sony. But I thought it would kind of crawl itself across a couple of years. I know I've mentioned it on this show before, but I love Skull and Bones. I do not have any anticipation that it's going to last decades But I do think Ubisoft, provided they don't implode, which is still an open question, is going to support it for at least enough time for me to get what I want out of it.
Sure.
And I thought Concord would last a longer time than it did. Obviously longer than 2 weeks. I thought I was going to get some intro videos. I never got.
I mean, like I told you, it was incredibly expensive, and a lot of people didn't understand that a lot of the cost was in activations and things that they had already spent that they were planning on rolling out. It's clear that during the Prime, anthology, that they had a new character that they were going to reveal, that they were going to roll out to the game. All this stuff was done.
Colin, so remember when people told you that it is inconceivable for any video game to cost $400 million, and then reporting came out that Call of Duty Black Ops back in several years ago cost $700 million.
Yeah, I mean, I stand by what I said about Concord. Like,
yeah,
it is what it is, and people. It's just too bad that the execution was bad, because I do think, like many things, it's all about the execution on the field. Paper tigers, right? Like, you have to execute the plan, and the plan was sound. Let's invest in a bunch of games as a service and just see what works. I think that that's good, but you do that externally or with the partners that really make sense. It's cost you multiple teams, and it's cost you the timelines of multiple teams that will presumably continue to exist. So you've really fucked yourself. I mean, they even fucked over, again, as I said earlier, Naughty Dog. That game was the game that they were making, like the primary part of the team.
I did hear it was good too. I heard there's a lot of lamentation.
I heard it was very good, like very good. And it's a real,
it shouldn't work.
And then meanwhile, you presume that Bungie was going around apparently to the first parties, according to reporting, kind of giving their feedback. And it's like, who the fuck cares what they think? Do you look at the condition of their company and their game? Who cares? What they don't have the secret, they don't have the silver bullet anymore. They might have been 2020,
right? Like that's why you bought them, was to give that advice because it's so valuable. And then if they give that advice and say this should be shut down, you shouldn't spend resources on it, you've got the same executives saying, do we listen to this or not? Right? I mean, this is a kind of systemic dysfunction that happens when you have these investments. And so it's not a surprise to me that whether or not Bungie and Destiny were doing well at the time, the fact that we already spent this money, yes, you can say sunk cost fallacy till your heart's blue. It doesn't matter, because these people are in the room saying, yeah, we spent this money to get this kind of report. This is exactly what we wanted. Let's not waste this money on this thing. Let's cancel all these other things. But again, the only confusing part of this to me, and I know people are out there talking about this cancellation and saying, well, this is why Jim Ryan's gone. Maybe that is a case, but I don't understand why Herman Hulst is getting the pass on this, because he is still the creative mind behind Sony games right now. And he was when this stuff was all greenlit. So I don't have a strong reason to believe that there's a massive corrective action happening at Sony as much as I'd like to right now, because I don't see that change. I don't see Jim Ryan leaving as ultimately shifting their entire strategy in a way that works for what I want to play on their system.
I do see more and more people kind of think about Herman Hulst as a problem now, as opposed to
I don't know him. I don't want to say one way or the other, but it doesn't appear
I
like
him too.
Herman,
if you're listening, I like you, buddy. I think you're a handsome fella, and
he is a handsome fella.
I think you'd be a really fun guy to hang out with. If you were indeed in charge of Concord, not the best idea. But
I mean, who else would have? The fucking buck's got to stop somewhere. If it doesn't stop with the person who's the head of the teams, I mean, he must have been a force in buying them. They fucking bought them, and people want to sit here and be like, they didn't believe in that game. They didn't spend a lot of money on that game. I'm like, okay,
why would you buy a company? So. No, especially since Hiroki Totoki was like, we don't have enough original IP, and it's like, no, but they still went out of their way to buy it as opposed to developing their own thing,
Right, and they thought Concord was going to be the big sci-fi pillar for them.
The thing, yeah, and like I understand the inclination, because one, here's two more thoughts from me. One, Sony is very lucky that Microsoft is just complete ass right now.
I would say so.
They just have not figured out anything at all in terms of how to make money or make games, But two, Microsoft still owns Minecraft, a the most successful best-selling game of all time, a live service, a multi-generational staple millions and millions of people.
My girls love Minecraft.
Something that sells so much merchandise that makes all kinds of money is being sold to schools. And so it is even, Minecraft is not even popular. It is literally being institutionalized at a very young age to people, right? Mm-hmm. That is a real threat to Sony Entertainment, an entertainment company that can't sell Last of Us school backpacks.
Yeah,
it's like what Les Grossman said in Tropic Thunder. The kids aren't buying Tug Speedman backpacks for Purim anymore.
This is the point and again, it goes back into the strategy. You consider them generals standing around a map, moving pieces around, and the whole initiative makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. But once all of the pieces were deployed, they started getting pushed around in ways that didn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. And it's just peculiar. It's peculiar to buy a Blue Point, and then the masters, they were remaking games. It goes far beyond the stuff they made for Sony. They did stuff for Konami back in the day. They ported Titanfall to Xbox 360. They did a bunch of different things. Like, this is what they do. You guys make a multiplayer God of War game. The fuck are you talking about? Mm-hmm. Doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. And no one there was like, what? And no one at Blue Point that's supposed to have the passion for this is like, yeah, we don't want, you too big for your britches now? This is what you were supposed to be doing.
They're supposed to be the passionate. I interviewed them, and you're like, "Oh, we're so passionate, and we love our unique abilities to make great games even better." And no one fucking spoke up.
Well, I do think there's a version of the story where that's what they wanted to do.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Rick.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was saying I do think there's a version of this story that says that's what they wanted to do.
The God of War game.
And yes,
and I think it was, but to me, I'm like, someone's got to direct them and be like, that's no.
Right. Well, and that version of the story has a Herman Holst figure who is unwilling to have that conflict point and is just letting the developers kind of steer the ship a little bit. And we do see that at Microsoft. We do see that with some of the stories about Phil Spencer and the treatment
about how
companies.
very hands-off they are, which is why Redfall turned out the way it is, or whatever, or why they don't know what the fuck is going on in a lot of their studios.
It's a possibility, yes. And you said, Colin, earlier that Sony was not worried about potentially losing sales to Xbox. That might well be true. But if I'm Sony and I'm looking at the tail of this generation and who's going to transition with us to PlayStation 6, I'm more worried about Switch. If the Switch 2 comes out and can perform even remotely in the ballpark of a modern generation, and I'm talking about like a PlayStation 4, really, then if I'm at Sony, I'm worried that their first-party software is the best, and it's already got a huge audience with full backwards compatibility, and we've got basically nothing to sell in our library on the transition to generations. That's where I get concerned.
Yeah. And then the Switch 2 is going to debut with a new Mario Kart, the game, the fifth best-selling game of all time, and the game that is 1 to 2, basically, in the Switch customer base, right?
Yeah. I mean, at least as far as we can tell from the Nintendo side of things, they've been holding back studio announcements for a year and a half. They could hit us with just giant announcements whenever this April 2nd
Metroid Prime is what
show comes up.
Yeah, Metroid Prime 4, the new Mario, which is about time too, because that's been forever.
Yeah, it has been. Yeah, 2017, right? For
2017.
Mario.
You want to talk about long development time? Nintendo's doing that too with Mario, but they've always done that with Mario.
Yeah,
the mainline Mario games, anyways.
Yeah, you guys, you're totally right. We talk a lot about Switch too, because I talk about this idea that I think more PlayStation games will come to Switch, and could see that in some sense this is actually more urgent, because now they're probably like, oh my God, like we actually got to churn some revenue on older games. How are we going to do this? The PC stuff is doing okay. I think they're feeling good about that. I think that they kind of dodged a bullet, because I don't think it's even affecting the sales of the console. So I think they realize they can have it both ways, and it doesn't really matter. So that's good consoles
for them. Yeah, and they do believe in the strategy of like, okay, well, you get it on PS5 first, if you want to be an early adopter, or if you want the sequel, God of War Ragnarok first, and you buy it on PS5 first. That is
window's getting pretty short,
part of their strategy.
Yeah, that window is getting shorter and shorter.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I've been a lot of the audience doesn't agree with me. I've been very aggressive that I think they should just start releasing many of their games on PC at the same time.
I think they might.
Because I just don't, I just think these are two different audiences at this point. There's some crossover for sure for the most hardcore people, but I think people just play one way or the other, and you can kind of harvest them both. But I'm just flabbergasted by the sheer luck, as you guys have noted, the ineptitude of Xbox, the trajectory and inertia of PlayStation 5, how third-party games are vitally important, more important than ever, these games as a service or whatever. And Sony's just kind of making passive money, and they can kind of sort this out and figure it out. Mm-hmm. But it's just such a shame because it could be, as I said earlier, this is now the basement of where they could have been. They could have sold, imagine 10 million more consoles with a few more huge games ready to go. And that does matter to people, but I would just be lying and pretending if I said from a player's perspective that I care that much, because I really don't. I mean, I want these games, but I look at my cross media bar, I look at the games I buy, I look at all the games coming out, and I'm flummoxed. So if Sony literally is like, we're not releasing a game for 5 years, I'd be like, all right, I mean, that sucks. I want to play these games, but there's a lot of other stuff to play. I'm not in need of it, in other words, anymore. It's a very different generation. And I would argue that PlayStation was never that reliant on its first party. The first party was always additive. I think the PS3 era probably hinged on the first party the most. But if you go back to the PS1 and PS2, especially PS1, they published a bunch of games, but they weren't first party games. They didn't really have a first party. They had Psygnosis and then later like Santa Monica. And the games they were making were like Kinetica and Fantavision and
baby.
Parappa the Rapper and stuff. The third party stuff was always the big stuff. Gran Turismo obviously was huge from first party. But other than that, it wasn't really about that. It was about
10, Grand Theft Auto 3,
right, Grand Theft Auto, Metal Gear, right, exactly.
I'd say like 989 Sports was big back then.
Right, 989, right, exactly. Annualized stuff, that ended up kind of becoming San Mateo Studio, and some of that stuff went to San Diego, and they still have the baseball stuff going on. But yeah, they used to have the annualized NBA game. They had different high heat baseball and all the rest. To me, I just look at it and I'm like, I just,
now, though.
It's right. It's totally different. People, and this is the problem that I think we're experiencing as a developer at Lilymo, but just also a lot of other developers, is that there are more people playing games and there's more money being spent, but there are fewer slices of the pie because people are all in on these games. And it used to be isolated to, when I knew MMO people that played EverQuest 20 years ago or whatever, that's what they played. That was weird, but there were people like that. But now that seems to be kind of the thing.
A lot of people.
There are people that I play Warframe. I play that. And to me, I'm like, that's never been the way I've been. So Sony benefits from this because it's just passive income, but it does reinforce the need for them to be in those spaces. And it does underline, and you're going to see it when Ghost comes out and when all these other games come out, they're going to sell millions of copies, but you're going to do the math in your head and you're going to be like, they made like $100 million on this.
Yeah.
And it's just not that much money.
That's not
which I wouldn't say no to.
I think a lot of people forget that. It's like, oh, they sold like 5 million. And it's like,
they might have broken even at 5 million copies.
That's barely breaking even, if anything. Like they probably wouldn't. If these games are expensive. So
right,
yeah, we're gonna have The Last of Us 2 on. I guarantee you that Final Fantasy 7 Remake and Rebirth will be on a Switch too. Square Enix is so horny to get on the Switch too. Finally, for Final Fantasy 7,
they should be. I want. So here's one thing that I think Sony can do, and I think they have. To their credit, they have done a good job of this, and I think a lot of this does come from them slowly realizing they had a problem, which is second party games and third party timed exclusives. And I think that they've done a pretty good job actually of keeping those going. And if you didn't have those, then it would look pretty bad. So. Your Silent Hill 2s, your Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth at the time they come out, your Grand Blue Fantasy relinks, and your Rise of the Ronins and
Stellar Blade. Yeah.
And Stellar Blade, right. And being much more flexible than they used to be, as far as it's surprising to go into the trademark filings and realize that they don't own any of these games, wherein just a generation ago, they would have never, ever played ball unless they owned those IP. And now it's like, no, you can own Stellar Blade, you can own Neo, you can own Rise of the Ronin. We just want it first. And I think that will continue to be a pretty powerful tool. Death Stranding is ostensibly one of those games now, and we know that because there was something deep in the contract for the original game that 5 years to the day it came out, it ended up on Xbox. And that to me is crazy, because I didn't know that was even a possibility.
Yeah.
So you imagine, you look at Death Stranding 2 and you're like, there's only a matter of time before that goes to other platforms too. But I think that's the way that they can continue to win. And I think the great irony too is that should all the rumors about Xbox and its affiliates be true, Microsoft will be the biggest publisher on PlayStation next year or this year. And moving forward, that might potentially be true, except for if you want to count like the annualized EA shit. Other than that Sony is going to be saved in some way in the software front by a company that, dude, here's the thing. If you're at Microsoft and you're looking at the way all of this is playing out, you're kind of like, maybe we shouldn't have gone and done this because maybe we could have held some of this stuff back and maybe they're more vulnerable than we thought. But now
they're a software company. I mean, the one thing I try to tell people as much as I can, Microsoft, it's right in the name. They're a software company. They really don't care about the hardware console fight. And so they are stroking their beards, if at all, saying this is playing out just fine.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think that's obvious with Satya and others. But I just look at the strategy of Xbox and I'm like, yeah, this could have materially affected you. It's just the nature of time and the nature of what you know and what you don't know and the way things are breaking down behind the scenes and it's not clear. Yeah. But I look at this now and I'm like, yeah, they would have actually been much more vulnerable. Sony would be pretty vulnerable if it had an aggressive opponent right now, but it just doesn't. And though I think Switch 2 is going to be great and it's going to sell well, I just still think these two companies are still on different planes in some sense, playing with the same software pool of third-party games, but still in different places. And we know PS6 is going to come out. I mean, we saw it basically in I don't know if you guys read the Famitsu co-CEO interviews from the end of last year.
I did
where it was basically said that we understand that they're basically saying, like, in so many words, like, PlayStation 6 is coming. It's going to come at a normal time that you would expect it. And there's going to be an even greater differentiator between PS6 and Switch 2 to where, and I think these things will exist separately. But I don't know. I just was curious what you guys thought about it, because obviously I think we'll get more reporting behind the scenes. I think we'll end up seeing what happens with Bluepoint and Bend, because I'm just not totally convinced that they're not going to do anything to them. And Bluepoint, maybe not so much. Bend, I feel like, I don't know. And I feel especially bad for Bend because they're in the middle of Oregon, in the middle of nowhere, and there's not other jobs in game dev there. It's a shame because real people are affected by these bad decisions, but the games might have just not been coming together either. But there's just no doubt you can't paint over this. It's just not a good situation. I just think they're lucky that it doesn't really matter that much. And those are two, you can't deny that either. You know?
Yeah. Well, I think we as players can feel the pain of failed projects, right? That we didn't get to play things from these companies on a timeline that works for us, and we're going to have to wait longer to hopefully play something that does work for us. I can understand, certainly as someone who's acutely aware of the scarcity of life and time that we have, that it sucks that we have a lost decade of Sony first-party bangers, right?
Ditto. Speaking as also somebody who has a very, very acute sense of the limits of life and how much time we have on the Earth. That explains so much of my frustration about why these games are taking so long, because I would want to play them now before I fucking die.
It's a bummer. It's a total bummer. Just that there's a lot of compounded time, like decades and decades of lost time between all these cancellations, and like I said, more than $1 billion in losses, easy.
Yeah, and I'm the guy who would see this. I think you called it an arms race earlier, Colin. Wind down. I am very much in favor of smaller games with less high definition textures and still having as much fun as I used to. It's one of the reasons the Switch works for me so well. Yeah, it's on a chip from a 2013 cell phone, but with good art and good kind of culling of vision spheres and things, you can make really good, well-performing, awesome games like Nintendo has proved throughout its entire lifespan. So I'm excited about that. And even though I reported on or commented on the Microsoft Activision transaction as much as I did, and people think that I'm an Xbox guy, I play most of my games on my PlayStation. Sony's best thing for them in view of my playtime is that my head thinks of them as the only place to play JRPGs, even indie ones, right? And I play a ton of smaller games like that, and I will get them on the PlayStation Store instead of the Xbox Store or the eShop. And that's most of what I do with the Sony right now is play Chained Echoes or play RFL or play Tribreaker on that particular system. And so they're benefiting from that. I do not want for games. You're right there. But you're also right in saying they could have built a moat. They could have sold many more. This could have been a PlayStation 2 style generation, and they could have made mistakes for the next 20 years and still lived off the success of this generation. That's not going to be there for them anymore.
Yeah, at a time, I mean, you're exactly right. And at a time where things are changing, where in the mid to long term, they're in trouble because it is ultimately going to be about games and your moat and your offering through cloud services playable over televisions and other screens. I think we're always ahead of this conversation, but it feels right to say that the PS6 must be the last console before they really move. Because by the time you get to another one, you're in the late 2030s. Are we really still going to be doing this? I mean, I would be down for it, but it just seems unthinkable. So you're right in the sense that they really could have buttressed their financial situation for a turbulent time ahead. And now I think it becomes more, now the question is, what do you do? Because Sony has cash on hand, not much. They're profitable. PlayStation's profitable. It's like, do you aggressively go and start buying studios and start getting games almost Microsoft style? We're going to start buying projects in development and start getting them. Or do you just accept that you can probably get the milk without buying the cow? And that timed exclusivity is probably the way forward for you. And you can sprinkle your first party and your second party stuff in there.
I think you're right. They've gotten great mileage out of the Stellar Blade contracts and the Rise of the Ronin contracts and the Final Fantasy VII contracts. There are people out there right now on social media and elsewhere arguing that those are Sony games, not published by them, but for all practical purposes, from the player's perspective, Sony games. And yes, that's a lot cheaper than buying Firewalk. And so that's something that you have to look at Sony. I do think that you have to have long-term strategy saying, when do consoles end? When do we become a smart TV app? And what does that mean for all of our cost infrastructure? And you need real people with vision looking at those things. And if I'm on Sony's team, I'm worried. But I love my PlayStation. I love playing games on it. I look forward to Sony's output whenever it comes. And I think they are justified in whatever worry they have behind closed doors.
Yeah, it's well said. They'll figure something out, I think, but I fear. Well, I'm just curious about. It's interesting that the audience seems to have rejected largely a Game Pass style subscription service. Mm-hmm. So they have their competitor kind of exploring things fruitlessly as well, and they're both getting answers from each other by the failures of each other in some sense, and will hopefully redirect their resources and their attention towards different kinds of solutions. But I just don't see no one really loses from timed exclusivity, in my opinion. It's not the same as a Game Pass inclusion where you get a huge upfront sum and it kind of cuts your ability to sell a la carte copies and all of the rest. And it has these downstream effects wherein I think it's very attractive to independent AA and AAA studios for a company like Sony to come and be like, listen, we'll give you $50 million, or we'll give you a much better cut. Like we'll give you a 90-10 cut instead of a 70-30 cut, and we'll handle the marketing. And in return, you are exclusive for 2 years, and then you can do whatever you want. Yeah, I think that's going to be Sony, mega attractive, to a lot of.
I see that Dawn Walker trailer and I say, get me that guy's number. Like that's what I do immediately if I'm Sony, but I don't know what they're going to do.
Right. And I think that for the biggest of the big games, it doesn't make sense for those companies to do it, right? Dawn Walker's even one of them, but like a Grand Theft Auto, when people talk about that, it's like there's just no reason that you would do that.
It was never going to be a PS5.
But for marginal games where a $50 million infusion of money or better rates on, selling on PSN or removing marketing from your budget or getting engine help and engineering offload and contracting and all of the rest, like a lot of companies would be like, yeah, all right. And I just think that that's where they need to be, because it just allows them to get to the next game. And for a lot of these studios, that's all they're looking for.
Yeah, well, and I don't know Rebel Wolves' financial situation, but I do know that.
Well, Bandai Namco is publishing that game. So
yeah. Are they?
Yeah.
Do they already have a publisher? Mm. Well, then this is not something that will happen. But for a company of that size making their first game, you do have the ability to go say, I can aggressively position myself with a cash offer because you don't have a lot of runway to make mistakes. You haven't had your first profitable product. And that's what I would be looking at. I would be looking at one of these offshoot companies that doesn't have a publisher like Namco and say, hey, is there some fire there? Is there something that catches the attention of people online or otherwise? Because I don't want to be in the business of spending hundreds of millions of dollars making what I think is going to work for people with a firewalk and just have it die on the vine when I put a beta out, right? And I think Concord should scare Sony because from a game quality perspective, the shooting elements were there. A lot of the game design elements were there, but people rejected it for reasons that Sony didn't anticipate. And that winds up feeling like I don't understand the market if I'm in the executive offices of Sony. And then you start to question your judgment on everything else. So I would want something that has a little bit of cachet on the front end that I can buy into with some amount of leverage to make my system go. But I agree with you completely, Colin, that that's the right way to think about things is outsourcing development, outsourcing risk to some extent, using whatever pile of money I have to go and buy those things to sell my consoles without making all of the risk my own.
Yeah, there's no quick way out of this problem because you could say like, oh, we'll staff up Naughty Dog to get games out quicker. And it's like, well, then you just dilute what Naughty Dog is. You have to just let them cook. So the only way out of this is to get back on timelines internally while seeking out high quality games. And again, this is why Shuhei Yoshida leaving or not having his contract renewed or whatever happened there. And certainly he was demoted back in the day, and which is also peculiar. And you can see based on what he was saying with Kind of Funny from what I've seen that he was maybe right about some of the things that were going to happen. But even seeing him leave is a bummer because he has such a good eye on the independent scene, which has also been fairly important for Sony to carve out timed exclusivity. So that's the only way out. But I just wanted to see what you guys thought of it as a kind of impromptu topic. And
yeah. Well, as Gene said with respect to therapy speak earlier, the only way forward is through, right? Like that's what the therapists say. And that's unfortunately where Sony finds itself right now.
Yeah, and again, Sony's lucky that Microsoft is ultimately, and Phil Spencer has told me this and admitted this fully too, Microsoft is not an entertainment company.
Yeah.
They don't understand how to nurture and nourish artists. They don't see opportunities in entertainment, which is why they rejected a Doom and Halo crossover episode, a Secret Level, because they just don't see that vision of how entertaining that is, right? But we've been beating up on Xbox all day, so I will say that Xbox does have a pretty impressive lineup of games coming up right now with Avowed and Fable, which we obviously haven't seen, but Avowed and South of Midnight or whatever that's called.
And their last game was a winner. I love Indiana Jones. I think they
Indiana Jones are really good too, even though it's not a game that I like. But I have to admit that it is a beautifully constructed and well designed and interesting design game. Really,
this is what I was saying about the irony of things going well for them, but they've made the decisions that they've kind of made, and these games are all going to end up on PlayStation at the time when PlayStation needs the game. So it's going to
sell well on Sony. Yep.
Yeah, but it works out for both of them in some sense. It's the acceptance of a new reality, I guess. I just find the timing so, and that's what I'm saying. Like Microsoft is going to be the biggest publisher of content, especially when you include Minecraft and Call of Duty. I mean, it's crazy. Times have changed, but
it is weird that exclusives don't work though, because for me, like I would have bought a PS5 by now for Final Fantasy 16. Oh, Final Fantasy 16 is coming out. Well, I should probably buy a PS5 now.
I think for some people, it's about the confluence of exclusives too. It might not be about one, but maybe about 3 or 4. And,
sure.
And so even then, there are just so many fewer to work with now. But I'm really happy. I love the PS5. I'm perfectly happy with it. But I also admit fully that it has nothing to do with Sony. It's just about the games that are there to play. So
yeah, it's a good platform.
Really, you could have now. Some of them are second party games, but I probably would have had a fairly equivalent experience on Steam actually this generation than I did on Sony, with rare exception. So. All right, my boys, it's good to talk to you guys today, this Friday afternoon. Let's go around the horn and say goodbye to everyone. Hogue, goodbye to you, my friend. Be well.
Goodbye. I had a fun time talking with y'all about this. I am excited about talking about games, and I'm excited about talking about things on my channel too. I have not been as prolific as I was a couple of years ago, but I've gotten a couple of videos out each week in 2025, trying to get a little bit more consistency on the channel. And so I know one of the things I covered was one that we've talked about a lot, Colin, which is Ubisoft in general, and most recently the second delay of Assassin's Creed Shadows and what it means for everything happening behind the scenes. So if you're interested in that, come over, check it out on Virtual Legality. Otherwise, I've also been taking up the mantle that I used to have in 2022 of looking at celebrity defamation trials and have talked a lot about Blake Lively, Ryan Reynolds, and Justin Baldoni, which is not a name I knew before any of this happened. So if that also interests you, congratulations, you're a freak. But you can come to my channel and see that as well.
Sick. Yeah, congratulations getting back more and more on the horse. Yeah, you're doing a great job. And the Ubisoft stuff I find especially intriguing. There's always something new. Now it seems like maybe there's going to be like a divestiture or something and some sort of new entity built. So there's a lot of new stuff to get into. It's unclear
what's happening there. Yeah. There's probably another Virtual Legality in it in the future.
Yeah,
but
we'll save it for that.
There does appear to be some Tencent, Yves Guillemot negotiations happening behind the scenes.
Indeed. Yeah, interesting stuff. And then Gene Park, be well. Washington, D.C. is going to be pretty crazy these coming days. Well, what are you going to be doing?
Actually, on Tuesday, I'm going to be heading back up to New York City for the New York Game Awards.
Cool.
So I'm going to be hanging out with Cog and the I Lawrence podcast up there.
Nice.
Sam Lake is getting the equivalent of the Lifetime Achievement Award. It's at the SVA Theater.
Nice.
Which is where we had our live show.
We sold that place out.
Yeah, and this New York Game Awards kind of struggles to do that. So
I would like to meet Sam Lake. You tell him hi for me, Gene.
Oh yeah. Sam Lake and I are buds now at this point. He said so many nice things, but he's actually said to other people that Gene Park gave me the best interview of his career when I interviewed him about Alan Wake 2. And that's the kind of interviews I like to do. You know, like Colin was talking about how much of a good interview he is, and obviously I agree. But I like to have interviews where I talk deeply about like the artistry of the games, and that's why my interview with director Hoshino for Persona and Metaphor did incredibly well. Because people really wanted to read my interview with Hoshino and what we talked about, and that was great.
Yeah, we need more kind of literary analysis of video games. I think your stuff is great on that, Gene.
Thank you, I appreciate that. But yeah, we're going to New York Game Awards on Tuesday, so I'll be avoiding inauguration, the hecticness of that. And next weekend I'll be at MagFest down in Maryland.
Cool.
The Music and Games Festival.
Not to be confused with MAGA Fest.
No.
And not to be confused with
MagFest is Inauguration Day. So,
and not to be confused with MagFest, the festival all about the 2010 zipper shooter Mag.
Oh yes, exactly.
Yeah. Massive action game.
Great game.
That's a game I haven't thought about.
So Sony should have brought that back for the goddamn live service. Goddamn.
200. What was it? 256 people or something?
256 players. Hell yeah.
It's hysterical.
We still don't have games that big anymore, man. What happened to us?
It was ambitious. It was ambitious for sure.
Yeah. What happened to the big ideas? Now we're celebrating Mario Kart 9 with 24 racers, which is actually quite a lot of racers. 256 racers on Mario Kart. That's the Mario Kart live service.
Yeah. What'd you say, Hook?
I'm sorry. Do we even know that that's Mario Kart 9? I saw people reporting on it as 9. But
no, it's not officially Mario Kart 9, but it is clearly a different version of Mario Kart, and it's probably, it probably is. But man,
that would be huge.
Mario Kart, that's gonna be crazy.
Cool. Yeah, I'm gonna be just watching football this weekend, and I actually broke out the PSVR 2 yesterday for the first time since probably the week it came out, and started playing Arizona Sunshine Remake, which I like. It's pretty cool. It started making me feel a little sick after about an hour, so I stopped playing it. But it's
a Batman game on PSVR 2?
No, it's a Meta exclusive.
Only Meta? Wow, no kidding. That game looks really fun.
Money hat.
I played that, but I don't know if I buy Meta for it. But
I believe Camouflage made that game, and I think Meta bought them.
Yeah.
Oh, they did. Yeah, they made. God, I can't even remember it anymore. They made like an episodic Metal Gear style game right back in the day. Oh God, what the fuck was it called? And then they did the Iron Man VR game, right?
They did.
Yeah. So, what the fuck was that game? I can't remember it. It doesn't matter. All right. So yeah, that's what I'm going to be doing. But boys, we'll reconvene again soon. I appreciate you guys taking the time to talk to me today, and of course, all of you guys out there for listening. Hope everything's well with you, especially if you're in LA. Hope everything's going okay with you. We have a big audience in Los Angeles, and we're thinking of you. Early ad free access, patreon.com/lastdaymedia, merch, lastdaymedia.store. Have a great week, because this is going live on a Monday. I was going to say weekend, but you have a great week. We'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye.
See ya.
Constellation is a product of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC and is proudly recorded in the USA. The show was conceived by and is directed and hosted by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is my brother, Dagan Moriarty. The show is produced by Last Stand's executive producer, Dustin Furman. All Last Stand theme music is by Ramon Narvaez, and all of our graphics and logos are by Dagan Moriarty. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's podcasts, including Constellation, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer level on Patreon, our highest support tier, and we're infinitely grateful for your thoughtful and kind contributions to our independent endeavor.